The wind off the high plains came with teeth, thin and needled, rattling the dry juniper branches like gossiping bones. Maren Kestrel kept her head down and her scarf up, each breath a hot bloom that turned to glittering frost the moment it left her lips. The evening was collapsing fast, the kind of winter dusk that has no patience for second chances. Somewhere beyond the swale the sky was already bruising purple, the sun a torn seam between clouds. She had been walking since the freighter wagon threw its wheel and the driver waved her off with a barked apology and a shrug the size of the prairie. 20 miles to the next rise, he'd said, and you look sturdy, and then the cold had decided to show her what sturdy meant. Out where the land went on forever, the wind could make a cathedral of sound all by itself. It sanded her thoughts smooth, left behind only a simple prayer, wood smoke, or roof, anything. Maren tucked the letter deeper into her coat, a folded scrap of future that said Junction Creek Ranch might have a place for a cook if the new foreman didn't mind a green hire with steady hands and the nerve to ask. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The last of the light wavered, and with it her confidence. Stubborn got her this far. Stubborn could also get a girl killed when the wind turned mean and the path turned to guesswork between lacework drifts. She flexed her fingers, already stiff, already slow, then caught it, a line of smoke, thin as a hair, lifting from a dip in the land like an idea. Please be a stove, she muttered through chattering teeth. Please be luck I didn't borrow. The cabin was built the way men build when they plan to be somewhere else, quickly, squarely, and without apology. A line shack, most likely, for riders making rounds to count cattle and check fence. Smoke curled from a short iron pipe. The door, raw planks braced by a crossbar, hung true. Maren knocked once, twice. Her knuckles made the sound of bone on a table. She listened hard. The wind answered. She took hold of the latch and eased it up. Heat touched the air inside the way a hand touches a shoulder, tentative but real. A pot simmered, gently speaking to itself on a black-bellied stove. Shelves of split wood rose in a careful stack. The light was lamplight, amber and forgiving, reaching up to make a little island of evening in a world of cold. The man who belonged to it was quiet as a prayer said after the church has emptied. He was tall in the way fence posts are tall, economy and purpose, and he moved like a horse picking its footing among stones, deliberate and spare. He looked up from the stove, and the first thing Maren noticed were his eyes, winter-lake gray with a rim of darker storm around the edge, steady and measuring. His hair was the color of sun-aged straw, his jaw looked like it had never lost an argument. She was not the sort to frighten easy. But cold has a way of making all your pride feel like thin cloth. Words came out in a tangle before she could comb them straight. "Sir," she said, because his eyes made the word feel correct, "can I slip under your blanket?" The spoon in his hand stopped. The stove ticked as if clearing its throat. He did not change expression, exactly, but the air changed around him, as if a hawk had drawn its wings in. For half a heartbeat Maren heard herself, heard how the police sounded sitting alone in a room with a stranger and a single bed and a night that would close and quick. Her face burned hot enough to be a sin. I mean, she swallowed and forced the rest of it through lips that wanted to chatter themselves into a whole separate language. Only to stop shivering. "I can't feel my hands. Just a corner. I'll sit on the floor. I don't want to die polite." Something eased in the set of his shoulders, not warmth exactly, but a decision. He turned, took a wool blanket off a hook, and unfolded it in the yellow wash of lamplight. Then he reached for another. "You take this one," he said, low and even, the kind of voice you trust to tell you when a horse is lying with its ears. "I'll set another by the stove. Sit close. Hands first." He brought out a tin basin, poured in hot water with a pinch of coarse salt, and set it on a wood crate. "Wrists," he said. "Not fingers yet. You thaw fingers first, you'll regret learning what pain is in a small room." Maren obeyed because something in the way he said it made obedience feel like competence. The heat took hold of her wrists, sent little pain stars racing up to her elbows, but it was the good kind, the kind that said a body was returning to itself. The wool around her shoulders had the smell of clean smoke and horse. He set a mug by her knee, steam curling up with the sharp sweet promise of peppermint. "Thank you," she said, meaning more than the tea. "I'm Marin." He nodded as if the name were a fact to be stored in a dry place. Asa Merrick. The name fit him, spare and old as the fence post he resembled. He didn't ask her questions. He didn't crowd her with the kind of friendly a girl has to fight. He tended the stove with one hand and broke the silence with the other in small, necessary ways: the scrape of a door on the stove, the shift of the pot, the click of a cup set on a scarred table. She let the heat do its holy work and watched him the way a traveler watches weather, careful, a little awed. The man moved like stillness had been taught to walk. When the water cooled, he swapped it without asking, poured the spent warmth into a bucket and fed the basin again. He did it as if the motion were the answer to a question that didn't need words. When she could feel the ends of her fingers without feeling all her sins, he nodded toward the crate. "Bread. Jerky. I was about to boil beans. You're in time to watch them pretend to be food." The corner of his mouth turned up, not a smile so much as a dispensation. "I can cook," Marin said, and then, because she loved the truth more than she loved looking small, "better than I can ask for favors." "That's so." The words were neither challenge nor dismissal. They were a place she could set a fact down without it rolling away. She slid the blanket tighter around her and stood, the cold scurrying a last lap up the legs of her trousers. Her boots left dark stamps on the plank floor. "Let me." She reached for the pot, checked the beans with careful fingers, tasted the broth and winced. "You weren't lying about them pretending. Didn't seem the night for lying." He moved aside, student to her sudden teacher. Marin found a scrap onion, a thumb of salt pork, the smallest clutch of dried chiles at the bottom of a sack. A good cook knows courage is as important as pantry. She sliced, toasted, coaxed flavor from the meanest beginnings, and watched the air warm into something that smelled like home you haven't found yet. When the beans were dignified enough to admit to, Asa brought down 2 tin plates in a respect that measured itself by how much he didn't say. They ate sitting near the stove, boots toward it like worshippers at an altar. The lamp made a circle of gentler time around them. Outside, the wind scratched its claws on the walls and failed to get in. "Where were you headed?" he asked finally, "before the cold convinced you otherwise?" "Junction Creek," she said. "Cookhouse job if I can claim it." "I've got a letter," she tapped her coat. "From a cousin's friend who says they'll give a girl a look if she can boil coffee and stop men from dying of their own appetites." "I do both." Asa's eyes weighed the claim. "Men die of a great many things," he said. "Appetite among them." He tilted his head toward the letter. "You hold on to that like it's a map." "It is." Marin let herself lean back, just enough to show her bones a little mercy. "A map out of a town that decided my mind was useful until it wasn't, and my hands were useful until they weren't, and my tongue was useful until it said no to a man who didn't know the word." The stove answered for him, a soft rush of flame as it found more breath. He didn't crowd the silence. He didn't ask for the name of the man or the town. He looked at her like a horse looks at a fence, measuring whether it was built to keep danger out or keep something honest in. "I can pay," Marin said after a while. "Not much. Enough for the wood I used, the tea, the lesson about thawing. Or I can work for it. Patch a saddle, scrub the skillet so clean it shines like a preacher's promise." "You'll pay me by not dying on my floor," Asa said, and stood. He crossed to the narrow bed, dragged it closer to the far wall, then took his bedroll from a peg and unrolled it on the planks by the stove. "You sleep there." Door side. "If it gets colder, I'll bank the stove. If anything tries the latch, I'll hear it first. I can keep watch." Marin said it because it was true. She had learned to bargain with her own fatigue and sometimes win, but also because offering kept the pride in a body from curling up like a leaf. "You can." "Tomorrow," he said, and the simplicity of it felt like a hand lifting a burden without remarking on its weight. She lay down with the blanket wrapped more carefully than any embrace she could remember. The bed smelled of cedar and clean cotton and a man who did not waste sweat. Asa banked the stove and settled onto his roll, hat pulled low so the lamplight made a brim of shadow over his eyes. For a while the only sound was the small ticking of everything cooling, the cabin letting night into its wood and giving it back as warmth in the right places. Maren stared at the rafters and felt cold slide out of her bones like a bad rumor leaving town. Her body, which had been a tight fist for hours, opened 2 fingers. The letter lay in her coat nearby, a heat of its own, a small, square, stubborn yes in a world that had lately been a long string of no. She let the thoughts run and then let them tire themselves out. Somewhere in the hours between late and later, a noise cut the quiet like cloth being torn. Not wind. Not stove. A horse. Horses, she corrected herself, because once you have learned the difference you never forget it. The sound of iron on stone, of breath steamed out in work, of leather creaking with the conversation of movement. Her eyes opened to darkness shaped by embers. Asa had not moved, but the brim of his hat had lifted enough to show a thin slice of reflection where his eyes would be. "How many?" he asked, as if she were a scout and not a girl who had thawed her hands in his basin. 3, she whispered. "No, 4. One's holding back. Doesn't like the way the others ride." He nodded once, a decision carving a line at the corner of his mouth. He stood without sound and put the lamp out with a pinch that seemed to know exactly how much darkness to make. The room became a study conducted by the stove's red tutors. He opened a drawer, took out a short double-barrel shotgun and a patience that looked practiced. He didn't chamber it. He just set it on the table the way you set down a Bible when you mean to read and aren't proud of every page. "Stay where you are," he said, too quietly for anyone but the stove and Maren to hear. "If they ask for water, I'll give water. If they ask for more, we measure their asking." The knock came with the heel of a hand, a demand with leather on it. Maren could smell the horses now, the wet metal scent of their bits, the strong animal heat like a promise that belonged to another world than the cabin. Asa slid the crossbar up and back. He opened the door to the width of his shoulder. "Evening," he said. The man on the step wore a wool coat that had seen a better owner. His hat was sooty, narrow-brimmed, too eager, wrong on the horizon. His mustache had the kind of starch that tells you who he is before he speaks, trouble that combed itself. Behind him gathered 2 other shapes, each trying to take up enough space to be important. The 4th man, the one who didn't like how the others rode, hung back on a dark horse and took the measure of the world without letting it take too much of him. "Fire looks friendly," Mustache said. "We'll have it." "It's busy," Asa said. "I can spare coffee." "We'll have that, too." Mustache's eyes went past Asa, trying to slide into the room the way a weasel slides under a henhouse plank. Maren kept still and studied the 4th rider, as if looking hard enough with a kind mind could shoulder a river another direction. He didn't look like the others. His coat was clean, his hat sat on his head like it belonged there. When the wind pushed the brim up a hair, she saw eyes like creek water, quick and layered, seeing more than they told. Mustache was still talking. Men like Mustache liked the taste of their own sentences, rolled them around with their teeth before swallowing. "We're south of Junction Creek by a good hour, maybe 2, he said, which was information offered the way men offer a lie, too smoothly boxed. "We run a freight line. Will went near the ridge. My men are cold. Your stove is hot." That's a math problem with a moral answer. Asa looked at the men the way he looked at a woodpile, to learn what winter it prepared for. "Coffee and a place to stand out of the wind," he said. "Nothing more." The 2 men behind Mustache shifted, the kind of shift that means a body is preparing to make a shape in a smaller space. The 4th rider's gaze left Asa and touched Maren's face where it glowed faintly, then touched the corners of the room where habit sits. He tapped his horse's neck once with 2 fingers, a calm down without a show. Mustache smiled. "I'll take the bed, then." "Coffee and a place to stand," Asa repeated, not unkind. "Or wind." For a moment the whole night balanced on the lid of a pot. Mustache held the silence by the corner and shook it like a rug. Then he laughed a little and stepped back so that the cold pushed forward, greedy and bold. "Coffee, then, and we'll drink it out of your good manners." Asa poured with a hand that did not say what his other hand was ready to do. He gave the two men cups and set one on the threshold without touching Mustache's glove. Mustache didn't like that his glove was rejected. A man who spends time on his mustache spends time on his glove. He took the cup and sipped and sucked in his breath when it burned him. He looked past Asa again, and Marin watched the way his eyes stuck, just for a moment, on the bed's corner, and the second blanket hung to air on a chair. "We're looking for someone," Mustache said at last, his voice full of innocence that rang like a cracked bell. "Girl. Slipped town without asking the right people the right way. We've got papers say she belongs to a household. A cousin worried sick. You wouldn't have seen a girl, would you? Pretty thing. Dark hair. Mouth on her." Marin felt her heart do the thing a rabbit's heart does when hawks make geometry overhead. It tried to get small enough to be safe. She told it no. She had not survived this long to make herself small enough to fit into someone else's lie. Asa took his time. He filled his own cup, thumb careful on the rim, and let the steam find his face. "I've seen a great many girls," he said. "It's a large country." Mustache's smile grew something like teeth. "Some counties are smaller when you owe the wrong man the wrong debt." He leaned on the door jamb so the door had to accommodate him. "You Americ?" "Asa," Asa said, a syllable that went down like iron and came up like sure footing. "That the sort of name a man uses when he wants to be believed." Mustache chuckled. "We're lawful, Mr. Asa. County paper. A judge's scribble. Girl we're after is 19 but simple as a lamb with a ribbon on its neck. Needs guidance. Maybe thought a letter was enough to buy freedom when we both know letters are cheaper than winter wind." Marin let herself move then. Not much. Just enough to put her boots flat and her hands where she could stand with sense. The fourth rider saw it and looked directly at her for the first time, not like a man looks at an object, but like one human reads another's weather. There was sorrow in his eyes, and something like apology, like the shape of a man trying to be two kinds of person and hating both. Asa looked Mustache full in the face and gave him back a silence that was like a mirror. Mustache studied himself in it and didn't care for the view. His shoulders made the kind of angle a problem makes when it decides to be a trouble. "Coffee's thin," he said. "And your hospitality lacks ambition." "I lighten both," Asa said. "For safety. You got a woman in there?" Mustache's tone turned dirty around the edges, the way cheap cloth phrase at cuffs. "Because if you do, and she's the one we're after, I'll collect her, and you can keep your soup of beans and manners to remember me by." "No woman belongs to you," Marin said. The words left her mouth before fear could finish its audition. She stood. Not dramatically. Not to prove anything. Just stood in her own body like a person who had decided to stay there. Mustache's eyes snapped to her voice, then climbed her shape the way a snake climbs a low branch. "Well now," he said softly, "there you are." The fourth rider lifted his reins and moved forward half a horse. "Garan," he said to Mustache, low but edged, "we came for the paper, not a scene." Garan. Names are useful. Marin tucked it away like a tool she might need in the dark. "You'll pardon me," Asa said, and there was no pardon in it. He stepped so that half of him filled the door and half of him was a question none of them could solve easily. "The only papers that matter here are an agreement between my stove and the cold and the kind of law a man makes with his own time. Men like you think a cabin makes you a kingdom." Garan smiled as if he were trying to soften gristle with his teeth. "But law rides, Mr. Asa. And it rode here." He pulled a folded document from inside his coat and held it up. The lamplight from within touched it just enough to show seal wax broken and resealed and broken again. "Judge Harlan, county seat. Words that say a girl named Marin Kestrel is to be returned to guardianship for her own good and the settlement of modest obligations." Asa looked at the paper without looking at it, the way a man looks at a rattlesnake in the hole it might want to re-enter. "Judge Harlan sells signatures cheap," he said. "Everyone knows it. Papers like that are the trousers of a lie, sewn quick, worn quicker." Garen's smile thinned. "You a lawyer now, Merrick?" "No, Asa said. I'm a man with a stove and a memory. He let the silence grow hoarfrost. The wind picked up and pushed its shoulder against their coats. The fourth rider, his horse a patient black with a star on its brow like a thought, watched the way Garran watched Asa, and the way Asa did not watch Garran at all, only the space between the man's hand and his center. We'll take her, Garran said finally, reasonable the way wolves are reasonable when they are not hungry enough to run. She's coming back. Simple as that. We've got a wagon behind the ridge. You don't, Marin said. Your freighter lost a wheel west of the Narrows. The iron trailed a bright scar in the stone. You walked the last mile because pride makes poor math. Your fourth man didn't want to come at all. She looked at the quiet one. I'm guessing they said it would be a conversation and you wanted to believe them because the part of you that still knows your grandmother's prayers needed that sentence to be true. His mouth twitched, almost a smile and almost a wince. Garran turned his head slowly, venom poured into a teacup. The fourth rider lifted his hands, palms out, a small display for the cold, for the horse, for the girl with a blanket around her shoulders who had seen too much to be fooled. I told you, he said to Garran, quiet. Collect the paper, say your piece, and let the man be. She's not property. Law says otherwise, Garran snapped. Men wrote that law, the fourth rider said. Men like you. Garran took a slow breath and let it out in a sugar fog. Enough philosophy. He stepped toward the door, and Asa stepped forward 1 inch, the kind of inch a fist makes when it decides not to be worthless. Garran stopped. He gave the inch a name it did not deserve. Assault me, and your stove won't burn long enough to cook your excuses. I'm no lawyer, Asa repeated, but assault begins with a hand and a choice. I intend to keep both. Then make another choice, Garran said. The right one. He reached toward the latch and Asa's hand moved, not to the shotgun, but to the crossbar. He lifted it and then let it fall with a thud that sounded like a door deciding what it was for. Coffee, Asa said. A place out of the wind. Then you ride. Garran's eyes cut to Marin, sharp enough to sharpen themselves. You'll come easy, he said. Or you'll teach me how loud your no can get in the snow. Marin's mind went white for a second, the color of a hard truth. She would not go back. Not to the house where her guardian locked the pantry and the front door in the future in the same cupboard. Not to the arithmetic that made a girl's work belong to every mouth but her own. She could scream. She could run. Neither would serve in a country with more space than mercy. So she chose the small bravery that changes the shape of a room. She stepped to Asa's side and spoke where Garran could hear every syllable make a footprint. I'm 19, she said, as if saying it could pin the truth to the wall where no knife could scrape it down. I can sign my own name. I can choose my own job, my own road, my own stove. Your paper might lie so pretty it looks like a choir, but my no is older than your ink. The fourth rider bowed his head, for a breath, for a better version of himself. Asa didn't look at Marin, but something in him eased, a tendon letting go. Have your coffee, Asa said to Garran. Then leave. The wind's getting impatient. Garran drank. He did it in 3 mean swallows and the last one cracked his composure. He coughed and swore and then did the math. 4 men. 1 cabin. A girl with a voice that wouldn't fit into his pocket. A rancher who moved like he was always just before his own next sentence. He could press now and perhaps break the door in the night and the man. But there would be noise. There would be trouble. And there was always tomorrow for men who had never had to earn theirs. Keep your charity, he said, tucking the paper back into his coat as if it mattered. We'll be talking again, Mr. Asa. Counties are small after all. And so are stories people tell about men who think no is enough. He turned, and his men pivoted with him like doors on hinges that hadn't been oiled. The fourth rider looked at Marin one last time. He tipped his hat, not deference, not property, then turned his horse's head and went where the others went because a man's road is often the cost a man pays for staying alive long enough to buy a better one later. They were swallowed by the storm in a minute. The sound simplified, became wind and stove and the long breath a room takes when it has held still too long. Asa closed the door and put the crossbar in place with a care that made it an oath. "Thank you," Maren said. She meant the door, the coffee, the inch of space a man held like a standard. She meant the fact that he had not asked for her story and had still stood where a story tends to break. "You can thank me by sleeping," Asa said. He set the shotgun back in the drawer and poured another cup of coffee as if his hands had not been measuring the distance to a fight the whole time. "We start at dawn." "Start what?" "The road to Junction Creek," he said. "You were walking blind. You won't again. You'll guide me?" The room felt larger in an instant, as if walls that had been bracing themselves relaxed. "I'll ride as far as the river," he said. "After that the land gives you a spine to follow and there's a decent chance the sort of men who fold papers the wrong way will have found better weather to test." She smiled, sudden and unguarded. "You don't talk much, Asa Merrick. Talk is wind with fewer teeth." "Still," she said, "it warms things." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The stove answered for him, throwing up a small, satisfied sigh. Maren lay down and let exhaustion puppet her eyelids. Sleep took her quick as a coin off a bar. She woke to the precise sound of a match and the kind of dark that knows exactly what time it is. Asa had the discipline of a church bell, consistent, early, unbothered by anyone else's prayers. The sky outside was beginning to guess at itself, thin gray, then pearl, then a promise that today would be a day even if it had to wrestle winter to earn the title. They ate quiet food with good manners. Maren rolled her blanket and tucked it into a gunny sack with a neatness that would have made her grandmother nod. Asa saddled a dun mare for her, a patient creature with half a white ear and the good sense to move only when there was somewhere worth going. "Name?" Maren asked, palming the mare's neck. "Dolly," Asa said. Maren's eyebrows went up. "That's friendly. Horse doesn't need a legend to carry." They rode out with the cabin shutting itself behind them, stove banked, door barred, a small square of safety folded up and put away. The prairie in morning is honest, showing you exactly what it intends. The sky lay like a clean sheet pulled tight. Snow had erased some of the night's tracks, but not all. For sets of hooves made dark music across drifts toward the west. They kept a smart pace, sensible in the cold, steady enough to make distance, cautious enough to listen. Asa rode ahead and a hair to the side, not to place himself between her and trouble like a wall, walls fall, but like a signpost that keeps pointing the way even when the road objects. When he turned his head to check the land, Maren watched the habit in his eyes. He counted things, then subtracted them from danger, then put the difference where his hands could do something about it. By mid-morning the wind had softened to the kind of companion who knows when to hush. Maren let herself lean into the saddle and into the strange relief of having a direction before the day did. She thought about Junction Creek, about a cookhouse with steam on the windows and men who swore gratitude with full mouths and clumsy hats. She thought about her letter and about the word guardian and how it can be a false door in a fire. Asa lifted his hand, 2 fingers up like question and caution both. Maren halted without asking, because trust is a language you pick up quick when you meet a fluent speaker. Asa slid off his horse and crouched, fingers gloved and efficient at the edge of a shallow draw. He touched the snow, the bare scuff of grass, the place where something had given the earth back its shape. "What is it?" Maren whispered. "Will Marks," he said. "Old. Day old. But heavy. 2 mules. No shoes on the near side." She leaned down. "Saw nothing. Saw world." "How do you see that?" He didn't smile exactly, but the thought of one happened in his voice. "I don't see it. I know it. World tells you what it is if you stop telling it what you need." They moved on, cutting a line between foothills that had the look of shoulders huddled together in worse weather. Near noon they crossed a frozen creek that sang a high, broken note under their hooves. Asa dismounted and tested the ice with his weight first, then led both horses with the care a man saves for things that have saved him once. On the far bank, a small stand of cottonwoods made a place to stop. Asa handed her a strip of jerky and a pearly piece of hard candy that had been in his pocket so long it had learned patience. Maren rolled the candy around on her tongue and let sweetness be a map back to childhood for a short visit, summer kitchens, the slap of laundry on a line, her mother's hands teaching confidence how to hold a knife. "Why'd you come west?" Asa asked, not to peel her, but to let her choose a single bright slice to offer the day. "Because the East ran out of me," Maren said simply. "Or I ran out of it. Which is the same story told two ways. The West feels like a question. I have better answers when a place asks nicely." He nodded as if that were a kind of theology he could worship standing up. They were back in the saddles when the land around them changed its tone. It wasn't a noise so much as the absence of a noise. The birds stopped making their small commentary. The wind dropped its agreement. Asa's head tipped the way a horse's does when it hears something you do not deserve to hear yet. "Riders," he said. Maren felt the jolt run through her like someone had plugged her into the wrong season. "Garran? Don't know yet." His voice made the end of the sentence into an invitation to caution. "We'll make the stand of scrub up there. Quiet as making bread in grief." They tucked themselves into the shoulder of the land, the cottony shrubs taking on the responsibility of pretending to be larger than they were. Asa put Dolly's reins in Maren's hand and moved up the little rise on his belly with a grace that made the earth look like a friend he had promised not to startle. He came back 2 minutes that felt like soup stretched for 6 people when there was only enough for 4. Not Garran. Cattle boys. Junction Creek outfit. 12 of them. Relief and worry shook hands inside Maren's chest. "The ranch. Likely the outfit you aim to cook for," Asa said. "They'll be driving strays back toward winter pasture. Good chance for news. Good chance for more eyes than I'd wish right now." Meaning Garran's paper travels on tongues. Tongues always beat paper. The riders came on like an argument that had found the right words. Dust lifted under hooves where the snow had blown thin. The lead man wore a coat the color of money that has worked, brown and earned. He lifted a hand and the whole file of men flowed to a stop with the kind of unity that says a foreman has a voice and men have chosen to listen to it. "Morning," he called. "You two look like the wind tried to make you a story." "Rode through a piece of it," Asa said. "Asa Merrick. This is Maren Kestrel, with business at Junction Creek." "Ephraim Dunn," the man said, and his smile had the optimism of someone who makes payroll for a living and still believes men are mostly worth what you pay them. "Foreman. Who sent you to my door with your name already in my ledger?" Maren produced the letter, not with triumph, but with that good pride again, the kind that doesn't need to stand on tables. Ephraim took it, read careful, nodded once, twice. "New Clarence Peavy out of Abilene," he said, tapping the signature. He didn't hold a pen like a liar. He folded the letter and handed it back. "We're short-handed since Miss Liza married my best drover and took him to a warmer kitchen. Can you boil coffee without insult and put meat on bones without wasting beans?" "I can," Maren said. "I can also keep a ledger that would make a banker ask me to marry his arithmetic." The men behind Ephraim chuckled. Not mean. Not surprised. Pleased to hear a remark dressed in competence. Ephraim's eyes warmed. "Then come along and prove it," he said. Then, as if some caution were a condiment, "Any business following you I should know about?" Maren felt the mention of Garran like a bruise you check by pressing. Asa let her decide who she wanted to be in front of this new door. She folded the truth into something portable. "A man with a paper," she said. "The kind of paper that tries to tell you where to put your own feet." We declined. He didn't enjoy the grammar of it. Ephraim's mouth flattened. "Harlan's court been selling authority again?" "So Asa says," Maren answered. "He's right," Ephraim said. "We've been fixing it with vigilance and the occasional reminder that maps are not the land. You ride with us. Safer in a dozen than a pair. And if a man named Garran tries to plant his feet in my yard with a paper as his excuse, I'll show him the difference between law and its shadow." Asa's glance slid to Maren. It asked a question she'd always wanted to be asked. Do you want me where you're going? Are you choosing me or do you just need a horse and a compass until you don't? Ride with us, she said to Asa, before fear could answer for her. At least till the river. Ephraim lifted an eyebrow as if something in that sentence was a parable he'd missed. We'll make camp 12 miles north, by Cotton Run. You can take your measure there. They fell in with the outfit. Maren rode amid men who wore their competence like a coat that fit. Names came with the rhythm of hoofbeats: Hank, Sol, Rojas, Youngwell, whose hat looked like it had ideas above its station. Rojas rode near her and pointed out landmarks without the condescension of a man teaching a child. He sounded like a man reminding a colleague where coffee was kept. By afternoon the world softened to a white that wanted to be forgiven. The river came up in the land like a vein, dark where it ran free, milk glass where it had submitted to the cold. Cottonwoods made a guard line, their high branches writing black notes across the sky's paper. Ephraim called a halt and the machine of men turned into camp fast as a thought that has been thought 100 times. Maren slid off Dolly and tied her with a square knot that would have made her mother proud. In the cook space, 2 wagons nosed toward each other like gossiping aunties. She found a black iron range, a table that deserved a better life, and a barrel of flour that had the look of good decisions. She rolled her sleeves. "Let me show you our way," said a woman's voice, and Maren turned to find a figure she hadn't expected, a black woman a decade older than Maren, stocky and alive as Am. Her eyes saw everything and judged only what asked for it. "They call me Mercy. Short for Mercedes if you're asking proper." "I'm Maren," Maren said, and something unspooled in her chest at the sound of another woman in a world that felt like it had forgotten the recipe for them. "If you're Mercy, I reckon I'm delivered." Mercy laughed, the sound a skillet kiss on hot iron. "We'll see if you can swing a skillet like you swing that mouth." She handed Maren an apron and a knife with a handle worn into the shape of a sure hand. "Men think they run this outfit because they ride on horses. We know we run it because they come to a stop when they smell a thing they have names for." Side by side they built a meal out of cold and hunger and the particular joy of making many mouths grateful. Maren learned the camp's habits quick. Ephraim liked his plate late so everyone else could lay theirs down with 2 hands. Rojas took more bread when he was worried about weather. Will ate like a boy racing a train and apologized for it with his hat. Mercy moved among them like a tide, adjusting, refilling, swatting a joke here and a lie there. As dusk put down another claim, Ephraim came to the cook fire. He tasted what Maren handed him and nodded once, the kind of nod that writes a person's name in a ledger. "You'll do," he said. "And you'll be paid, which is more than I can promise for the men who were thinking with their spurs this morning." He shifted his weight. "Town word says Harlan's men put a price on their paper. Word also says a few drifters have been hired to make that paper into fact." His eyes went to Asa and back. "If trouble walks in, I need to know whether it is looking for you or for a story to tell about me." "Both," Maren said. "And neither. It's looking for the easy door. You aren't that." He liked the answer, or at least the effort it required. "Then we'll eat, we'll sleep, and if trouble wants a plate we'll see if it can stomach what we serve." Night arrived like a slow song, low and competent and exactly the right length. The fire made its own weather. Men told the day good night in all the languages work uses: sighs, curses, the soft talk you make to a horse that earned more oats than you can afford. Maren carried dishwater to the fringe of light and threw it in an arc, watching the steam lift and then vanish. Back at the wagon, Mercy leaned her hip against the sideboard and studied Maren's face like a doctor checking a pulse. "You've got a look on you I recognize," Mercy said. Like a woman who told a room what it couldn't make her into and is still hearing herself be brave after the fact. Maren made a sound that admitted it. "A man named Garran came with paper and the wrong kind of smile." "Paper can't hold a soul," Mercy said. "I've seen it try." She lowered her voice. "Ephraim's decent, but decent men sometimes forget how urgent indecent men can be. Keep your blanket tied tight. And if you hear boots gather where boots shouldn't, you shout my name before you shout the Lord's." "I'll try both," Maren said, and Mercy's quick smile was a benediction. Asa's bedroll lay a few paces from the wagons. near enough to see the cook fire, far enough to honor a margin that mattered. He had a way of sleeping like a man teaching rest how to behave, still, eyes soft shut, one hand near what mattered. Maren lay in the women's wagon, Mercy's, mostly, and felt the day run across her muscles like light across water. She was so tired her bones agreed to tomorrow without bargaining. It was the coyotes that woke her first, not because they were loud, they were careful, but because the night had been too quiet and now it remembered how to speak. Maren lifted her head and listened. Footfalls. Not horses. Men. The kind of soft a hard man learns. She sat up, pulled on her boots without letting her blankets complain, and slid from the wagon into air that bit and then apologized. The fire was embers in intention. Men slept like punctuation marks in a grammar the night certainly meant to edit. Asa, she whispered, but he was already up, a shadow peeled off the ground. His hand lifted, wait. His head tilted, listen. Voices, just this side of breath. 3. No. 4 again. A pattern is an accusation. Ephraim's shape lifted from his bedroll on a spring you only get by earning it each day for decades. Mercy's hand slid a skillet from its hook like a warrior retrieving a blade legalized by hunger. Will rolled over, snorting, then woke all the way as a hand closed on his ankle from the dark. He flipped and kicked and the hand disappeared with a curse. Lantern, Ephraim said, and the word was a wire that ran through everyone at once. Light snapped open. The camp leapt from shadow to fact. In the edge of it stood Garran and 2 of his earlier men and a third whose face looked like it had mistaken cruelty for achievement. The 4th rider was there, too, the hesitant one, with his hat in his hands like a man praying for a better script. Evening, Garran said, as if the night were something he had purchased and was now distributing in equal shares. I told Mr. Merrick we'd speak again. I find a larger audience encourages a proper tone. Ephraim didn't reach for a gun. He reached for a clean sentence and added iron to it. You're trespassing, he said. And you're late to supper. Garen's smile had been polished for this moment. We came for a girl under papers signed by a judge who keeps a respectable desk and a respectable pistol. We'll settle any argument in the morning. For now, give me what's mine. Nothing in this yard is yours, Mercy said. She didn't raise her voice. She lowered the room to it. I wasn't addressing the help, Garran said, trying a sneer on a face more suited to pettiness. Men of Junction Creek, we can be peaceable or we can be thorough. Choose a way. Ephraim looked at Maren, and Maren stood up in the light and in her name. I choose, she said, to sleep where my work is and ride where my name belongs. Your paper is a glove trying to fit a hand that isn't yours. Then you choose hard ways. Garran lifted his pistol a fraction, not to aim, but to insult the air. The 4th rider flinched like a man watching a child almost fall from a tree. Asa stepped forward and his shadow stepped with him like a companion. You pull that higher, he said to Garran, you had better mean it. I always mean what I aim, Garran said, and he took that pistol the rest of the way up like a man setting a table the wrong way on purpose. Boss, Will said to Ephraim, voice tight as cinched leather. Orders? Hold, Ephraim said. Words first. Then the other. Garen's eyes cut to Asa, then to Maren, then to the black shape of the river beyond the camp as if considering how blood would look on it. You'll walk to me, he told Maren. Or I'll collect you the way weather collects the weak. Try, Mercy said. She had a skillet in her hand and a prayer on her mouth that was not made of words. Garran laughed softly. The West is always so dramatic. He shifted his weight to take his first step. Something changed in the river's voice. It was small at first, like a man clearing his throat at the back of a church. Then it became a crack you could hear, then feel, then almost see as the ice remembered liquid and the liquid remembered motion. Every head turned a fraction, even Garen's, even Asa's, because a river reclaiming itself is a kind of sermon. And in that half-heartbeat, from the darkness beyond the wagons, something else arrived, the thud of hooves, hard and unashamed, too many to be dismissed, too close to have been missed unless a man was proud and received and inattentive to the way a horizon keeps its secrets until it wants a better audience. The new riders did not hail. They spread themselves in a crescent shy of the firelight and let the flames paint their coats in oranges and threats. The one in the middle swung down, boots hitting earth like a judge deciding a case before the first witness speaks. Marin's breath hung between ribs and answer. The man stepped forward, and the light lifted his face out of the helmet of his hat. She knew that face. Not because she had seen it, but because the world had learned to flinch when it heard the name attached to it. "Evening," he said, and the voice was a compliment paid to himself. "Name's Declan Voss." Asa Merrick's hand didn't tighten. It simply arrived where it wanted to be, in the room, the night, the men, the breath, decided as one to wonder if it would be enough. Declan smiled like a man showing the room all the teeth he had paid for. "I hear there's a cook here worth taking," he said lightly. "And a rancher who doesn't understand that the right kind of paper is just another word for permission." The fire snapped. Mercy took one small step that put her between Marin and 3 very bad decisions. "Careful," Asa said to Declan Voss in a voice that made even the river listen. "You're standing on ice and you don't know it." Voss laughed, a neat, expensive sound. And the knight leaned forward to see which way the world would break. Break. The word felt like a hinge in Marin's chest, the knight itself pausing on it, deciding whether to fold or swing wide. Fire popped, sending up a brief constellation that died before it learned its own names. Declan Voss stood in the half-circle of riders like a punctuation mark you pray as a comma and fear as a period. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Marin's palm was damp against Dolly's rein. The mare blew once, a soft question against the cold. Mercy shifted, skillet hanging at her thigh like a moon hammered flat. Ephraim Dunn had not reached for a gun because men who lead from the saddle know that the first weapon is the sentence you're willing to say out loud. "Asa Merrick," Voss said, tasting the name as if it were a whiskey he'd bought because someone else admired it. "I could have sworn the wind said you were a small myth, tucked into a smaller county. Yet here you are, standing where the map thickens." Asa didn't give him silence for long, he didn't give him more than he could use. "You came to a cook fire at night," he said. "You'll speak soft or not at all." Garran, already halfway to oily, tried to set his shadow inside Voss's larger one. "Mr. Voss," he said, with the servile confidence of a man who serves himself first, "the paper is in order." "The girl?" "She has a name," Marin said. The words were plain bread, no butter, no apology. Voss tilted his head, interest cutting him a finer silhouette. "Then say it." "Marin Kestrel." She said it the way a person plants a flag in ground the river keeps trying to claim. "Names are useful," Voss said. "They let you call a thing from a distance and expect it to arrive." His eyes slid to Asa, and in the look was a bankman's arithmetic. "We've a difference to settle. Between my contract with Harlan's court and your habit of refusing men who bring themselves with paperwork." "The court sold your paper," Ephraim said. "You bought a lie and wore it into the wrong fire." Voss smiled. It didn't involve his eyes. "Courts sell authority. Men buy it. We call that civilization until it breaks a man we don't like. Then we get particular." He let his gaze skate over the outfit, counting, measuring which bones would break easily and which would complain loud. Mercy stepped forward 1 inch, just enough to show the universe which way her gravity worked. "You hungry, Voss?" she asked. "I can put a plate in your hand so heavy with sense it might slow your mouth." Voss's laugh was pleasant the way varnish is pleasant, gloss over splinters. "Madam, if your meals settle arguments, perhaps I've been using the wrong tools." He looked at Garran. "You led me to a camp, Garran. Not to a conclusion. Next time bring fewer variables." Garran bristled, and the bristle looked second-hand. "The man Merrick hit her first, now he hands her to the ranch. I call that theft by relay. County will call it what I ask it to." "County will call it Wednesday if I oblige it," Voss said lightly, and Garran's jaw worked as if chewing on his own unimportance. Then Voss turned the conversation and the night both with a single sentence. I didn't ride here for paper. I rode for principle. Maren almost laughed. It came out of breath with ideas in it. Principle had never arrived on a horse wearing that expensive a coat. Asa looked like a fence line just after a storm, upright, scarred, still doing the job the wind said it couldn't. Your principle, he asked. That no man gets to build a country where my kind of man can't collect what he's due, Voss said. You put your back up against Harlan's pen and the men who hold it. I like a myth to shoot at once in a while. It improves morale. Ephraim took half a step that let every one of his hands find work, one calm on the air, one easy on the idea of a holster. You came for shooting? Voss's teeth shone. I came for a lesson. Shooting's a language I can speak if you insist on monotone. The river spoke again. Not loud. Not yet. But the tone had changed, a bass note grown under the treble. Maren felt the sound through the boards of her ribs. Ice shifts. It is the nature of certainty to crack when it has been asked to hold what belongs to motion. Asa heard it, too. Maren watched him place the sound somewhere he could use it later. He did not look at her, he didn't have to. She had learned his shorthand since the cabin, the lift of the chin that meant wait, the stilling of his left hand that meant ready, the way his breath shortened when he was refusing anger and saving it for work. Mr. Voss, Mercy said, voice like cast iron warming, you ever think how paper burns faster than beef cooks? I have men to fetch more paper, Voss said. But only one set of appetites to feed. He nodded to Garan. You're asking one last time. Garan faced Maren and found the version of himself that enjoyed his own reflection. Girl, he said, because men like him cannot help themselves around diminishment, you'll come now. I will not be refused in the hearing of these men. You've already been refused, Maren said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The knight was leaning forward to hear stories worth keeping. And you'll be refused again. You can live with it here, or you can carry it home like a lesson you paid too much for. Garen's mouth thinned. He lifted his pistol because that is how small men make big angles. Asa moved, not a step, just a decision, and Voss lifted a gloved hand without looking at either of them. Enough, Voss said, pleasant, bored, final. Merrick, take a walk with me. 10 paces to the dark. We'll talk about the geometry of what happens next. Foreman, your men will remain, still as fence posts, smart as accountants. If anyone twitches, the arithmetic gets bloody. Ephraim checked the men with a glance that counted them twice. Hold, he said. If he asks for talk, we let words try their luck. Asa's eyes found Maren for a single heartbeat. Not farewell. Not promise. Just, I'm moving, and if the world follows me badly you know the way back to fire. Then he went with Voss into a little pocket of night the lanterns couldn't push their courage into. Maren measured how much she could hear, boots correcting for snow, leather objecting to pride, Voss's voice trimmed to an intimacy that pretended to be respect. She edged until the cottonwood made a listening post and put her ear to the bark as if the tree had agreed to relay the conversation to a woman who had not been invited. You've got a reputation for staying behind your quiet, Voss said. I admire that. It takes discipline and a room you can afford to lose. But you stepped out tonight. And once you step, men like me make a dance of it. I stepped because a man pointed a gun at a camp where a hungry day had just gone to sleep, Asa said. And because a girl said her name and it didn't fit in your mouth. Voss chuckled. Your kind of chivalry is bad for business and very good for stories. Stories breed boys who think they can make me smaller by being larger in the mirror. I kill those boys, Asa. Not because I like killing them. Because I like not having to kill their cousins later. You don't have to kill anyone, Asa said. But you do, Voss said softly. Or you did. Dead men trail you like tin cans off a wedding wagon. You hear them when you try to sleep. They're asking you to be consistent. Silence shaped itself into a question. Maren wanted to walk into it and fill it with her own version of the world. She didn't. She learned fast, and the first lesson in nights like this is that walking young words into old arguments gets them shot. You rode here for your principal, Asa said. What's the cost of it? Voss's answer had the music of someone counting money. She comes with me tonight. Harlan gets his cut. Garan gets to pretend he's the kind of man who wins. You get to remain a furniture maker in a county that won't burn you for your kindness. In return, I don't buy your land out from under you, choke your water, and make your winters a year long. You've done that before, Asa said. Not asked. Said. Doing it now, 2 counties over, Voss replied cheerfully. This river, though, I'll confess, has some ideas about its own fate. Makes a man curious to test them. Which brings me to my second principle: if a land thinks it belongs to itself, I'm obliged to correct it. Men who talk to rivers forget who owns what. You think you own a river, Asa said. I own the ice when I put it where it wasn't, Voss said. He let the sentence hang like a noose. There's a dam west of here. A private dam. It catches more than runoff. You want to keep this camp from being swept into a Bible story, you'll stop being exactly the kind of man you've been. Marin pulled back from the cottonwood like it had thrown a splinter at her. The river made a sound then, a low complaint becoming a gasp. She imagined a dam held together by the kind of engineering money buys when it wants to be faster than sense. She imagined men with charges in a morning with no camp left to feed. What do you want with me? Marin called, unable to let the question go unanswered by her own voice any longer. I don't bait gold. I don't sign the weather. What in your arithmetic needs a cook? Voss stepped back into the light like a showman hitting his cue. You ride hard, you break a horse, you want a kitchen to smell like a thing worth owning, he said. And if I can steal a cymbal while I'm eating, so much the better. The county loves a story. I plan to feed it one. Ranchers can't keep what they win, and girls who say no get taught better vowels. Then your county will choke on it, Marin said. Because it's tough meat and it wasn't raised right. Spirited, Voss said, approving and cruel at once. He looked at Asa. Time's up. He snapped his fingers. The men behind him unclasped their saddle secrets, 2 long bundles of cord, oil-slicked and patient, a canvas satchel that didn't flop like bread or clank like tools. Garan didn't know what he was watching, which made him smile wider. The 4th rider, the one who knew how to be ashamed, closed his eyes for a moment as if instructing them in a better use of darkness. Ephraim finally put a gun in his hand. Not much. Enough to give the room a horizon. You brought powder to my river? He asked Voss. You ready to watch men drown to write a paragraph about yourself? I brought a demonstration, Voss said. A small reminder that the things we build to hold us can also be used to cut us down to size. He nodded at his men. At dawn. Dawn is a courtesy, Asa said. You mean to keep it? Voss considered, then shrugged. It photographs better. He swung into the saddle with a practiced care that said he'd learned falling the expensive way once. Foreman, I'll be back with the sun. Merrick, I expect a different answer. Miss Kestrel, don't pack light. I take everything, or I take nothing. I prefer the first. Heel clicked. The line of riders unhooked from the night and moved as one. Garan tried to bow, but the movement looked like a body learning a harder lesson. The 4th rider's horse hesitated, then followed. The camp's quiet filled back and behind them, ragged, like a lung after a sprint. Only when they were specks against the idea of dawn did anyone let their knees remember fear. Mercy exhaled like a stove that had been asked to cook with its own wood. Talk, Ephraim said. All of you. Fast and in order. Asa laid out Voss's geometry without drama. Marin filled the gaps with what the cottonwood had translated to her heart. Words made a map, men gathered around it with their fingers and their futures. He'll blow the dam, Will said. Or pretend to. Either way, he expects we'll bend before we break. He expects we don't know the river as well as he knows money, Rojas added. He might be wrong. He's used to men who sell each other to buy a day, Mercy said. He might be wrong twice. Ephraim rubbed at his jaw like it was a lantern he could coax a genie from. We can ride, he said. Break camp, get distance, put the river at our back and Voss's math in the wrong column. And leave men downstream to learn swimming from an obituary? Mercy's eyes sliced to him. Not while I keep this skillet. We can fight, Will ventured. Set up rifles in the cottonwoods, wait for dawn to give us silhouettes worth spending bullets on. We don't make war in a kitchen, Mercy said. We make plans you can eat. Ephraim looked to Asa, not for permission, but for a compass. Asa's face was a study in hard roads and low voices. We need 3 things, he said. Eyes on the dam. Hands ready here. And a way to make Voss choose a different sermon when he rides in. Maren felt the plan settle into her the way dough settles after enough kneading, not softer, exactly, but more itself. I can ride, she said. I can climb. I can listen to it argue with water. You'll get your eyes. Asa goes with you, Mercy said instantly. And not because you need a man. Because he needs to do a thing he can sleep after. Ephraim's mouth tugged. Rojas, Will, you're on hands. Out of sight, in sight, both. Mercy runs the camp like Judgment Day and breakfast fell on the same morning. I'll keep the men's courage from leaking. Garran? Will asked. Garran is a weather vane without a roof, Mercy said. He'll point wherever Voss stands. If he rides back before dawn, I'll feed him something his mouth can't lie around. They moved. A camp is a body with a brain in many places. Maren watched it think itself into action. She and Asa took Dolly and a lean bay named Printer and wound into the cottonwood shadow until the river spoke in a register that made conversation secondary. The dam lay 2 miles west, where the river necked itself between stone shoulders and pretended obedience. It wasn't grand, a private undertaking thrown up by men who believe lumber is a synonym for law, but it was enough to bruise the river into slowness and make winter bold. The lake behind it gleamed like a held breath. Lanterns winked along the catwalk, men moved with the caution of the half-trained. Voss's, then. The moon peeled itself out from a rag of cloud and made everything fairer and more dangerous at once. Asa put his hand on Maren's arm, warm through the coat. He pointed to a notch in the bank where the ground slid down toward a tangle of willow and rock. Cover, if you were the kind of person who could invite your body to learn smaller shapes. They belly crawled. Snow learned their names and forgave the trespass, quiet under elbows that had other work to do. Maren's breath came disciplined. That was new. Fear had usually made it ragged. Asa's presence was a metronome she could match. What do you see? He whispered when they nested in shadow. 4 men on the catwalk. 1 asleep near the sluice gate's wheel. 2 by the fuse box, if that is a fuse box and not a painted confidence. She let herself smile at the edge of the thought. I grew up in a town with a telegraph. I know the look of a wire that wants to be important. He grunted, a sound that meant admiration had decided not to waste itself on words. Charges? In the wagon at the far end, she said. Canvas. Careless with the way it slumps. No powder men built this. Hired hands in hurry. Asa drew the whirlwind with his eyes and made it smaller. We could cut the fuses, he murmured. We could, Maren said. But if Voss expects it, he'll have a second plan the way men like that keep a second gun where decency doesn't search. Then we make a third plan, Asa said. One he didn't bring because he doesn't know the river's real name. They watched the men instead of the dam until the dam gave up more of its science through the men's habits. The one near the wheel scratched his nose every time he looked upstream, as if the lake offended him. The pair at the fuse box argued in gestures, one with his hands, one with his chin. The man asleep twitched at every crack in the ice like a dog dreaming about mistakes. Maren's gaze drifted to the water where it pushed against itself. The sound wasn't just sound. It was information. It said the lake was heavy and the ice believed itself immortal and both opinions would be tested soon. Asa, she whispered, the sluice. He waited for her to finish the thought. He was good at letting people take ownership of their own cleverness. If we open it a fraction, she said, we turn Voss's sermon into a cough. The river moves under. The ice thins where he expects thickness. At dawn, when horses and men assemble for theater, the stage won't hold. Spook them, Asa said. Scare the horses. Give men a new math, distance equals wisdom. And if we do it subtle, Marin added, they won't see our hands on the lever. They'll think the river remembered itself all at once. Asa's hand squeezed her forearm once. That was yes, and also pride, and also a small apology for every conversation in her life where a man had heard an idea and then explained the idea back to her more loudly. 2 problems, he said, practical. The wheel squeals like a pig when you turn it. And the sleeping one is dreaming about having something to shoot. Then we fix the first problem so the second never wakes up, Marin said. She unwrapped a strip of lard from Mercy's biscuit cloth and held it up between 2 fingers. Cook tricks, she whispered. We keep a kitchen quiet for babies and men with loud hangovers. Asa's teeth showed, brief and grateful. You go, he said. I'll be where the noise isn't. No, Marin said. We go. If I fall, you'll be busy with regret when you should be busy with solutions. He conceded with a nod. They slid along the bank, into the dark underbelly of the catwalk where icicles hung like a collection of bad choices. The sluice wheel rose above them, a rusted crown at the river's throat. Marin could smell oil and disuse and the deep iron of water thinking about freedom. She pressed the lard into the gear teeth with fingers that had known both pastry and blood. Asa's hands steadied the wheel and took some of the weight of the cold off of it. When they turned, the sound that wanted to be a scream became a murmur and then only a small, pain song. The gate lifted a thumb. Water, grateful for the new clause in its contract, surged. Not enough to announce. Enough to change the way the under-ice spoke to itself. The lake flexed its shoulder. Downstream, the river inhaled like a man who'd forgotten he could. They turned the wheel 2 more teeth. The water answered, secret and let loose. The sleeping man did not wake. The arguing pair at the box did not notice because men who talk with their hands and chins often forget to use their ears. Enough, Asa breathed. Enough, Marin agreed. And the word meant more than the sluice. It meant enough of men like Voss riding the day on other people's backs. It meant enough of paperwork that tried to make a person a handle. They slid back the way they came, 2 small lives resisting a much larger math, and reached the willows without donating their names to the cold. Only then did Marin let her knees memorize exactly how brave they had been. They were almost to the horses when the 4th rider stepped out of the dark. He didn't reach for a gun. He reached for his hat and held it to his chest. I told them I needed to piss, he said, apologetic to the ground and the sky both. Seemed the best kind of lie. Asa's hand was near his belt without being near his gun. You going to fetch Voss or fetch yourself a better life? The man's mouth made a shape it hadn't been allowed to make for a long time, unguarded. Name's Liam, he said, as if that might be a key in the right lock. Liam Pike. He glanced toward the dam. I signed up to guard wood, not to drown towns. Marin recognized the cadence of a man deciding whether his father would be proud of him tomorrow. Then you're done tonight, she said. Go home to wherever your grandmother taught you to say grace. Liam swallowed. I can do better than going home. I can tell you what Voss isn't saying. Say it, Asa said. He has more powder than he shows, Liam whispered. A second cache near the east buttress. Small, but set smart. If the main fuse fails, he'll spark the side and call it Providence. Where? Marin asked, already mapping. Liam pointed, there, where the bank made a small cave for driftwood and secrets. And he has 6 more men riding at dawn, not 4. He likes a choir when he preaches. Asa's jaw made something like gratitude. Why tell us? Because I rode far enough west to watch a river take a boy I knew by his laugh, Liam said. Because my mother lit a candle the day I left and I'd like to be a man that candle makes sense for. Go, Marin said, before he could talk himself back into Voss's gravity. If you ride now, you'll reach the bend before their lanterns confuse your tracks for their own. Liam hesitated. If I leave, he'll know I've thought about right and wrong and picked the unpopular one. He'll send someone to make sure I don't get to keep the habit. Then ride crooked, Asa said. Men who hunt straight lines never catch men who know their own shadows. Liam grinned, the expression like a boy finding his legs after a long fever. You talk like a man who's outlived something. More than one something, Asa said. Go. Liam went. He folded himself into the night with the practiced humility of a person asking forgiveness in the dark. They rode back toward camp using the river's new tone as a guide. The water had found its old pathway and was trying it on, unsure if it still liked the fit. The east had begun its bleaching toward day. Dawn would be pale, too pale for this much decision, but the world seldom consults men about aesthetics before it begins. At camp, Ephraim listened to the revised map. He nodded once at Liam's name as if to send goodwill down a road after a soul that had finally chosen the right set of footprints to wear. Good work, he told Merrin. He turned to the men. Positions. We are not a firing squad. We are a fact that refuses to move. Mercy feeds fear less than it wants, she finished and slapped dough against the table like she was disciplining individual pieces of worry. I'll keep them too busy chewing to run their mouths. They set themselves where the land made sense for staying alive. Merrin took the cottonwood flank with a coil of rope coiled twice. Asa stood a little forward of her like an argument she had hired. Will lay prone behind a fallen log that had the good manners to be almost the right height. Rojas blended into brush and expectation. Ephraim kept moving because foremen know that if their boots stop too long, men grow theories. Dawn stretched itself thin and then tore on the edges of the world. With it came Voss. He rode in with the calm of a man arriving at his own wedding. Behind him, 5 men he had not brought last night and 4 he had. Garran rode an expression he thought was consequence. He failed to notice consequence wears other clothes. Morning, Voss called, as if he were commenting on the weather and not on the number of people he expected to control before coffee. How did we sleep? Like men who trust the company they keep, Ephraim said. Ah, Voss smiled. Expensive. He looked to the dam. Lanterns there winked like uncertain eyes. The river, beneath its new manners, whispered to itself in a way that would become a shout if ignored. We'll start the demonstration, he said, as if ordering dessert. Merrin watched the catwalk. The men moved to the fuse like boys sent to fetch switches they weren't allowed to touch. The one at the wheel yawned and reached to scratch his nose, habit, and paused, maybe listening to a sound he couldn't itemize. He shook his head and set his hand where men's hands have been and turned. A small squeal. Barely a bird. He frowned and turned again. The sluice, helped by lard and persuasion and the arrogance of men who think they are the only story, gave more water a way to live. Ice groaned. The hair on Merrin's arms tried to be fur. Voss heard it, too. His eyes narrowed, then smoothed as if he had ironed a shirt. He lifted an arm. The man at the fuse reached. The man with the cigar touched ember to wick like a priest touching incense. Hold, Asa said, and his voice carried like a low bell. Voss didn't look at him. Light it. The fuse sizzled, a small snake waking. Merrin had never liked snakes. She liked this one less. She moved before the world told her to. Not forward into guns. Sideways into rope. She threw the coil with every hour she had ever spent learning how to throw anything well, dough, insults, hope. The loop sailed and fell and found the fuse halfway, then bit, then tugged. Rojas pulled with her, invisible strength making the rope a decision. The fuse popped out of its cradle and hissed into the river like a bad idea realizing it wasn't invited. Silence tried to be disbelief. Then it became gunfire. Voss didn't shout. He didn't need to. His men were the kind who take a man's eyebrow for an order. The air above the camp filled with bees made of lead. Merrin flattened behind the cottonwood, cheek in snow, a prayer in her teeth that wasn't aimed at anyone in particular. Asa moved in clean lines, turning himself into smaller targets and larger intentions. He didn't fire first because men who become the loudest thing on a field also become the shortest. He waited until a rider in a red kerchief lifted his pistol and squinted at the wrong part of the cottonwood. Then Asa fired once. The kerchief flew. The man, startled by the sudden absence of his prettiest threat, fell off his horse in a tangle of regret. Ephraim's men did not make noise where they didn't need to. They placed shots like checkers, careful and conclusive. Mercy shouted names, not orders, and the names landed in the right ears with the right angles. And still the river undercut everything. Voss's demonstration had become the day's demonstration. Water does not sign contracts. It negotiates with gravity and memory and almost always wins. Garran tried to be important. He spurred toward the wagons, pistol raised to look like intention. Mercy met him with a cast-iron sermon. The skillet rang against his wrist and the pistol bust into snow. He howled a word that had never been to church and fell off his horse with the amazement of a man who has finally met a real consequence. "You'll wear that bruise like a diploma," Mercy muttered, and went back to keeping men fed and alive. At the dam, the men panicked exactly the way Marin had prayed they would not and counted on them to. One grabbed for the fuse that wasn't there. One reached for the second cache, hands clumsy with cold and disobedient. The sleeper awoke to the sound of his future being negotiated without him and fired wildly at Ice as if it were a beast he could wound into kindness. Ice took offense. It cracked, a line darting across the lake like a signature becoming a verdict. The catwalk shuddered. Men clung to railings that had only wanted to be wood. "Back!" Voss shouted now, his first word with panic in it. "Fall back! To the bank!" His horse danced sideways, smarter than its owner. Marin took it all in with the greedy eyes of survival, the second fuse snaking toward the east buttress, the man with the cigar lunging after it, the way the river below them laughed in a register only stones and stubborn women hear. "Asa," she shouted. The second. He had already seen it. He ran, not toward it, because bullets own the forward, but along the geometry of safety until the east buttress was a shot he could make on a day he would remember with gratitude. He fired. The bullet clipped the fuse 2 inches from the spark. Flame fell into snow and made brief, stupid steam. The man with the cigar swore in a language that did not improve for being foreign. Voss wheeled, fury and calculation crashing into each other like drunk cousins. He looked at Marin the way a hawk looks at a rabbit that stands and teaches the hawk something about rabbits. "You," he said softly, like a craftsman naming the flaw that will make a table wobble. "You think cleverness equals safety." "I think cleverness equals breakfast," Marin said, and threw the rest of the coil. It didn't catch anything this time. It didn't matter. Because the river had decided the audience was large enough for its trick. The ice near the buttress gave a deeper moan and then collapsed into itself, a sudden mouth swallowing its teeth. The man with the cigar went down with a short scream and a long splash. His friend reached for him and learned what weight means to cold water. Voss's horse reared and came down hard. He got it back under him because money buys riding lessons you can use later, but the animal hated him for making it do arithmetic on ice that wanted to misbehave. He skidded, cursed, kicked. He made himself look like a man worth shooting. Asa did not shoot him. Marin saw the decision pass through him like a wind that brings or doesn't bring rain. He turned his barrel instead on the hinge pin that held the east gate's relief chain. The pin jumped, metal shocked by its own exit, and the chain slithered free with the sound of consequence. The sluice yawned. Water found new work. Chaos learns quick. Men who were brave for pay invented fear for free. 2 of Voss's hired hands spurred hard for the south bank and managed to make the kind of jump that becomes legend in smaller mouths. One fell, slid, clawed, and found a branch that had no business being anywhere but there at that exact moment. He would name a child after it. "Pull back!" Voss shouted again, but now his tone had the apology in it men keep for their own pride. His eyes scanned for Garran, maybe to use him as a shield or a lesson. Garran, cradling his bruised wrist like a newborn regret, crawled behind the cook wagon and stayed there, a monument to poor choices sheltered by good ones. It might have ended then, a rout, a retreat, a morning saved by lard and rope in a river's memory, if not for the thing that makes every story honest, the part no one planned. A shot cracked from the cottonwoods. Not from Ephraim's men. Not from Voss's. From the bend upstream, where the road cut down to the river and made a polite place to arrive. A single rider. Hat low. Coat dark. Rifle steady. The shot found Will's log, not Will, but it found him enough to remind him how many lives he had brought to the day. He yelped, rolled, and the second shot took his hat and promoted it to legend without his permission. New friend? Ephraim barked. Not mine, Voss snapped. I prefer my surprises to be of my own making. The rider levered the rifle again, fast and without conscience. Maren saw the motion and knew the man not by his face but by the way he and the gun were one sentence. She had seen that in exactly one other person. Asa didn't curse. He breathed something that was too private to be language and too heavy not to sink. Wade Hawkins, he said, like a memory he had not ordered. Brother number 2. Maren tasted metal. From Deadwood? From a story that refuses to stick to its last page, Asa said. Wade fired again, and this time the bullet sang past Mercy's ear and bit into the wagon wheel where it might later want to be round. Mercy swore, finished the word with prayer, and ducked back into the shelter of iron and intention. Voss, opportunist by trade, lifted his voice like a flag. Merrick, he called. You don't own all the ghosts. Stay down, Asa told Maren, and then he did exactly the opposite. He rose into the thin dawn, made of angles that do not apologize, and fired once at Wade to let him know the horizon did not belong to him. The field became 3 conversations at once, Voss against the river and reason, Ephraim against panic and pride, Asa against a past that believed it was owed another paragraph. Maren moved where she made a difference, which turned out to be everywhere and in the smallest places. She shoved a spare cartridge toward Will with her boot without losing the cottonwood's cover. She grabbed a hot brand from the fire and pressed it into the hand of a man whose courage had slumped, reminding him his fingers were still attached to his decisions. She shouted Liam's name into the wind just once for luck and for the kind of listening that feels like proof. Wade levered again. Asa was already moving, crossing open ground in the long low gait of men who learned to be hard to shoot by living long enough to improve at it. Bullets spit snow at his heels. He slid behind a stump and took a shot that pinned Wade to the road's humor. Wade answered with contempt and a miss that would have been fatal if fate itself had not tripped. Maren saw Voss doing arithmetic a new way. His men were fewer. The dam wasn't his. The river was a committee with a quorum. He needed the script to change, and when a man like Voss needs that, he does not rewrite the words. He burns the stage. He spurred, hard, toward the cook wagons. Maren didn't think. She sprinted, rope in one hand, brand in the other. Mercy shouted her name, a warning, a blessing, a promise. Voss's horse ate distance like money eats options. He aimed not at Maren, not at Mercy, but at the place between them where their work made the day possible. Asa saw it a beat before she did. He turned, yelled something the wind stole, and ran at an angle that made bullets late. Voss reached the gap and rose in the stirrups, pistol swinging to clear a story out of his way. Maren hurled the brand. It spun, a dull star, and hit the horse's bridle where leather had been oiled, not loved. The animal screamed, reared, and Voss lost one stirrup and then, briefly, his dignity. He stayed on because men like him do until the world takes the choice away. Asa hit him then, tackled him by the waist with the kind of respect you save for enemies who'll get you killed if you do anything less than your best. They went down in a tumble of dust and ice and rage. The pistol went off in the snow and is probably still arguing with a rock about who owns that hole. They rolled, 2 men with all their sentences trying to be first, until Asa came up with a knee in Voss's chest and a hand on his throat. Stop, Asa said. Just stop. Voss looked up into a Mercy he didn't recognize. He did the only thing he knew how to do with Mercy. He tried to kill it. He went for the knife he kept sewn into his coat like a lie. Asa caught his wrist, bent it, took the knife and the day away from him. The blade flashed once in dawn that had finally decided to be our witness. He lifted it, not to use, but because sometimes a thing must be visible to lose its power. Don't, Maren said, and the word was not to Asa. It was to the part of the story that pretends the only way to end a bad chapter is with a death. Asa hesitated. And in that half-second, Wade Hawkins fired one more time. Asa flinched, not because the bullet found flesh, it nicked his coat and history, but because the air itself barked a command. Ephraim turned and fired at Wade, not to kill him, but to write a boundary in the dirt. The shot hit the road at Wade's horse's feet. The animal reared and then did what any honest creature would do when asked to choose between a fool and gravity. It chose gravity for someone else. Wade went down hard, breath leaving him like an idea finally opposed. The false pause of victory sagged across the camp. Men who had wanted to be dead found they were not. Men who had wanted to be legendary found they were too tired to lie to themselves about it. Voss hissed like a man reduced. You can't win this by sunup, he said to Asa. You may have bought the morning, but the afternoon is mine. Asa got to his feet and pulled Voss up with him, more obligation than help. You're not owed any of the hours, he said. They belong to the living. He turned to Ephraim. Tie him. And not with respect. Mercy brought a length of clothesline she'd been saving for men who needed fine correction and handed it to Will. Will tied with the fervor of a convert. Rojas and two others dragged Wade from the road and into the circle. He was breathing. He was also angrier at the sky than he should have been. He spat blood into the snow and tried to make a philosophy out of it. Thought you were retired, he snarled at Asa. Thought you were pouring drinks and teaching men how to be docile. I was teaching myself how to live, Asa said. You should try it. You kill my brother, Wade said, like a man telling a story to a mirror. You took the only man who ever taught me a language I could speak. Asa's face learned a new sadness. He taught you the wrong parts of the words, he said. He forgot to say there's a way to be strong that doesn't require anyone else to be small. Wade lunged. The rope remembered its job. He fell, and the fall took out of him something that should have left years ago. He lay panting, eyes full of a hurt he was surprised to finally recognize as his own fault. Garran crawled from behind the wagon and attempted to stand like a man whose hat still fit his head. Mercy handed him his gun back with the barrel pointed at the ground and the sentence, "Don't embarrass yourself twice." Now what? Will asked, shaking and too proud to hide it. Now we end this without making it a beginning for something worse, Ephraim said. We hold them. We ride to town. We put a real judge between Voss and the story he tells about himself. Town has one judge, Garran said, finding his voice inside the bandage Mercy had wrapped his pride in. And he signs my paper. Town has 12 men who can read what's in front of their faces, Mercy said. We'll try that court. It would have moved then, ropes, horses, the processional of exhausted victory, if not for the way the river chose that moment to deliver the last lesson of the morning. The east sluice, freed beyond what men had intended, took a bite out of the bank that had been waiting years to be eaten. The ground under the cook wagon shivered. The wheel that had caught Wade's bullet cried out as if aware it was about to be nominated for sainthood. Then the bank failed with a deep, lovely, terrible sound. The wagon leaned, slid, and began to go. Men jumped. Mercy didn't. She grabbed the sideboard and held on because there were knives and flour and a life inside that wagon and she would sooner go into the river with it than watch it wash away her work. Rope? Ephraim shouted, and suddenly every rope in the territory was too short. Maren ran, every part of her remembering other winters, other unkindnesses, refusing to add this one to the tally. She threw what she had, the line that had saved the fuse once. It arced, slapped the wagon's rear hoop, and slid. Mercy caught it with one hand because a good cook always has a hand free. She wrapped it twice and braced her feet. Dolly reared, sensing the wrongness. Asa was already there, grabbing the line, setting his weight, making himself an anchor where the land had proved it couldn't be won. Pull! Mercy grunted. The wagon shifted, paused, and the pause featured 15 years of meals. It slid again. Rojas and Will and 2 more men flung themselves to the line. It bit into palms and made saints out of calluses. The wagon stopped sliding and began to argue about it. The river waited like a patient thief. Stakes. Ephraim bellowed. Set stakes. Marin turned to run for the tool chest and collided with Voss. He had gotten to his feet in the confusion. His hands were still tied, but men like him don't need hands to make ruin, they need mouths and aim. He lowered his shoulder and hit her like ambition hits a country. She fell, the world tilting, the sky becoming ground. He kicked her once in the thigh to teach the nerve there who was in charge, then sprinted for a horse with both his hands like a prayer and both his feet like a theft. Asa. Marin managed, but he was in the line and the line was in him. A man cannot be 2 physics at once. Voss made the saddle, turned, and with his wrists bound, somehow found a way to make his heel touch iron. He backed the horse. He found Garran with his eyes, and the 2 made a conversation of escape. Don't, Mercy said to the universe, to no effect. Voss spurred. Garran scrambled to follow, dragging Dignity through snow like a bad dog on a short leash. Marin scrambled to her feet and ran, because running is a stance you can take when you cannot take any other. She reached for Dolly's reins. Dolly understood and gave away speed like a gift. Marin. Asa shouted, and the sound was a rope he couldn't hold. She heard it and didn't put it down, but she didn't slow either. Voss cut for the road. Wade, on his knees, laughed because some men's humor forms only under the weight of other men's trouble. Marin leaned into Dolly and the mare decided there was nothing in the world more interesting than catching a man who believed the world was his saddle. They thundered past the bend where the rider had first appeared, up into white that looked like forgiveness and wasn't. Voss's horse was fresh, but fear makes a mount foolish. Dolly was steady as bread. Marin closed. Voss, she shouted, because if a man is going to remember your name, you want to pin a different memory to it. You've had your morning. The day is not for sale. He glanced back, surprise sharpening his profile. He reached awkwardly for the reins with bound hands and nearly lost them as the horse took offense at the rearrangement of hierarchy. Marin came alongside. She flung herself out of the saddle the way a girl who has read the right stories believes she can. She hit him at the waist, Ace's lesson, modified for gall and gravity, and they both fell. They tumbled in snow that smelled like old grudges and new errors. Voss rolled on top, then Marin, then the ground made its vote known by hitting both of them exactly once. She came up with a breath and found herself with her knee on his throat and her hands on his tied wrists. "Be quiet," she said. "I'm negotiating with your future." He bared his teeth. It might have been anger. It might have been warmth failing. "You'll never make it stick," he hissed. "I'll bleed on a judge and he'll call it ink." "Then we'll use more paper," Marin said. "Mercy's got a whole ledger." Hoof beats. Asa arrived, the bay sweating gratitude, his face the color of men who prefer not to watch the people they care about make the kind of choices that improve the rest of their lives. "You all right?" he asked. It sounded like an insult to ask. It felt like worship to hear. "Yes," Marin said, and surprised herself by meaning it. He hauled Voss up by the collar and tied him again with a competence that comes from not wanting to ever have to do a thing twice. They turned back toward camp in the river's lecture hall. From the ridge they could see the wagon. It had held. The line looked like a sentence written across the air, and men were standing in the grammar of it. Mercy had one hand on the wheel and one on the world. Ephraim swung an axe, setting stakes with the grace of a man who had decided to be useful every day of his life. Will's hat was now a conversation piece and he had begun to enjoy the attention. Rojas had both hands on the rope and his heart somewhere near the knot. They reached the line and added their weight and the day rewarded them with the slow miracle every good plan hopes for, enough. The wagon shifted in the right direction and stopped arguing. It settled back onto ground that had decided to be honest for one more hour. Men cheered the way you cheer when the thing you're glad about could still change its mind. Mercy sagged exactly 1 inch and then remembered she was an institution and stood up straight again. Voss, tied to a cottonwood with creativity, smiled like a man ordering a drink he cannot afford. "You feel heroic?" he asked. "Does it fit?" "It pinches," Marin said. "That's how you know it's the right size." "Town," Ephraim said. "We've got a cart, a pair of mules, half a will I trust, and a handful of men who remember the right kind of anger. We go now." "We go careful," Mercy said. River's still in a mood. They lashed Voss and Wade to the cart with enough rope to reach back into last year and tie up the decisions that had led to them. Garran got a place walking in front where he couldn't fall without announcing it. The men took positions along the flanks like grammar marks shepherding a sentence toward sense. Marin climbed onto the cook wagon to steady the contents and give Mercy a partner in the kind of work men never understand until the table is empty. Asa rode alongside, watching Wade as if the man might become a better story if observed with enough patience. They moved. The river followed, muttering. The sky pretended to be blue and then changed its mind. The road toward town unwound under them like a truth long avoided and finally spoken. They were 2 miles out when the world remembered it had one more thing to say. A rider approached, fast and alone, throwing distance away with the wastefulness of someone who believes in being in time more than he believes in his own bones. Marin's chest tightened until the shape resolved into Liam Pike. He slid to a stop with the elegance of guilt arriving at apology. "Voss's men are split," he panted. 3 went south to fetch Harlan. 3 went to your line shack, the one near the cottonwood grove above the Narrows. They mean to burn a story into your bed." Asa's mouth became a scar. "That shack's mine." "Was," Liam said, and flinched at his own tense. "Unless you ride now." Ephraim's gaze flicked between town and the Narrows and the men he was responsible for turning into tomorrow. "We can't be 2 places," he said, hating the truth for being so efficient. Marin looked at Asa and saw a door in him. It had letters on it. They spelled out the name Sarah, which was not hers and was still related to her future. Behind it were 1,000 nights where the right choice hadn't been an option because the man who should have made it had already been made into an instrument by his grief. "I'll go," she said. "With Asa. The rest of you take the prisoners to town. Mercy, keep Ephraim honest. Will, stop being a boy sometime before evening. Rojas, remember where your mother taught you to put your faith." "It's a trap," Will said. "Everything worth walking toward looks like one," Mercy said. "That's why we carry ropes." Ephraim nodded. He hated this. He loved that he had the kind of people who would not leave each other's houses to the fire. "Go," he told Asa and Marin. "We'll be smoke behind you if the town remembers how to be itself." They rode. Dolly in the base stretched out, hooves writing a language the prairie could read. Liam took the lead, his hat low, his shame functioning as a compass at last. The Narrows were a place where the land becomes intimate with itself, rock and river and wind pressed into one another until their quarrel is indistinguishable from their love. The line shack hunched above the gorge, pretending it wasn't tired of keeping men alive in weather that would rather not. Smoke. Marin smelled it before she saw it, the sweet bitter of timber thinking about not being a tree anymore. They crested the last rise. Flames licked at the shack's eaves like gossip that has finally found a fact. 2 men had torches. The third had a rifle. None of them had patience. Asa never shouted. He accelerated. The bay understood that speed can be a sentence, too. Marin followed, Dolly giving bravery back to her with every stride. "Drop it." Asa's voice came out like a law that had remembered its job. The man with the rifle wheeled, fired wild, and hit the sign Asa had hung over the door the summer he decided to start referring to the shack as if it were a place a man could come home to. The bullet splintered the word Merrick into something that could just as well read Mirage. Marin slid off before Dolly stopped and hit the man with the torch with her body. He went down with a complaint directed at the universe, which did not attend. The torch flew into snow and hissed like an insult corrected. Liam took the second man the way a confession takes a sinner, hard, fast, with a hope in it for later. Asa grabbed the rifle out of the third man's hands and used the butt to knock the bad grammar out of his next sentence. And then Maren heard it. A sound from inside the shack. Not wood. Not fire. A sound that had learned to be small because being big hadn't worked. Help, it said. Not loud. Not time for drama. Honest. Maren ran for the door, which was on fire in a way that disrespected both door and fire alike. She shouldered it. It gave after considering, and she went through into heat and smoke that made yesterday a rumor. Asa! Liam shouted, and Asa was there already, a wet wool blanket over his head, the inventiveness of men who refused to agree with flames present in his hands. He went low. Maren went lower. They found the source of the voice. A girl. 12. Maybe. Rope around wrists that had not deserved binding. I's telling the world that if it permitted this again, it would have to learn to live without her permission soon. Maren cut the rope with a knife that was supposed to be for bread. You're all right, she lied, because lies can be medicine when administered correctly. We're rude to fire. They dragged her out into air that apologized for what it had done. The girl coughed, then demanded water like a law. Liam fetched snow with his hands and gave it to her like a sacrament. Who? Asa asked, because if the world was going to take another bite, he wanted to know what mouth it was using. The girl coughed again and got enough breath around the syllables to make them matter. Man, with a mustache, she said. Name like a knife. Garan, Maren said, and felt the word do what it needed to do in her chest. He said I'd fetch good money, the girl panted. Said paper said so. She looked at Maren and then at Asa and then at Liam, whose face was reconfiguring itself into a man who might be worthy of the miracle of being alive. You are not paper. No, Maren said. We're fire with better manners. The shack would not survive. But it didn't need to, its job had been to keep a girl's name from becoming a line item. It had done that and could retire with honor. Town, Asa said. We ride now. Liam looked like he was asking a question that would decide who he was. I'm with you, he said, and when he threw away the last of his old gravity, Maren felt the world tuck itself slightly into a better shape. They mounted. The girl, Junie, she said between breaths, like June with a promise, rode with Maren, his arms around her like a new kind of sentence she hadn't learned yet but already wanted to speak in. The road unrolled. The sky took on the businesslike look of a day doing sums. Smoke lay on the town ahead like a blanket someone had thrown wrong. Ephraim's outfit had made it to the square. Mercy's wagon stood where the ground was flattest, which was never very flat. Men were gathered, women too, because some stories cannot be told without them. Voss and Wade stood under lampposts like seasons being asked to wait their turn. Harlan, judged by signboard and habit, had arrived with 3 deputies whose badges shone like metal trying to make up for what flesh refused to do. Maren felt her heart climb her throat to look out. Ace's jaw had a fractal of anger on it, a repeating pattern you can see smaller and smaller and it keeps being the same. They rode in as if they owned the road, which is the only way a person should ever ride into their own future. The crowd opened. Mercy's mouth opened, too, then closed. The skillet in her hand hung at her side like punctuation that had considered a period and chosen an ellipsis. Ephraim looked fresher than a man should. That meant he had used the right parts of himself. He nodded once to Asa and once to Maren and then to Junie like she was a witness for the state. Harlan stepped forward, his robes dusty from the ride he called a circuit and everyone else called avoidance. What is the meaning of this parade? He blustered. I was told there was a prisoner to be received. There are 2, Mercy said, voice level. And a 3rd if you count your conscience. Harlan's smile learned to be thin. Mercedes, is it? You make an excellent cornbread. I prefer you when you are baking. Mercy looked at her skillet like a friend who might need a dance partner. And I prefer you when you are silent. Ephraim lifted a hand. Judge Harlan, we're here to present Declan Voss and Wade Hawkins for arrest under charges of attempted murder, conspiracy to commit arson, unlawful detention, and possession of a personality unfit for public use. Murmurs. Some laughter that sounded relieved to find a place to sit. Harlan coughed. Unlawful detention requires a complaint. Junie slid off Dolly with more will than strength and stepped forward. I complain, she said. I was detained. Harlan blinked. By whom? By a man with a mustache who buys paper like candy, Junie said. She pointed at Garan, who had tucked himself into a crowd hoping crowds could be coats. They cannot. Garan smiled the smile of a man who imagines his dental work is a defense. Child, you are mistaken. Your name is Garan Pike, Junie said. You smell like the inside of a trunk. Laughter that was not Junie's friend became Junie's friend for an instant and scared Garan more than any gun. Harlan shifted to Voss. Declan, he said, letting first names do what they always do around power. Is there merit to any of this? Voss smiled like a man whose shirt cost more than the truth. Judge, he said, we had a misunderstanding with the river. It happens. I brought paperwork for Miss Kestrel there, he gestured at Marin with his bound hands, which entitles her guardian to recover what's owed. Her guardian tried to set a girl on fire, Marin said. I brought paperwork, too. She lifted her letter to Ephraim and the notarized statement from Clarence Peavy and something else, the ledger Mercy had entrusted her with on the ride-in, where Mercy had been writing names of men paid fair and debts forgiven and bread delivered free to houses where sickness had done the wrong kind of accounting. This is the community's paper, Marin said. It says who we are. Yours says who you wish we were. Harlan looked from the ledger to Voss's seals to the crowd. His mouth did math. His eyes did politics. He adjusted his robe like it might save him from being seen. I see, he said, which was a lie. Judge, a voice interrupted. Wade. He was not the man who had shot at breakfast anymore. He was a man with a decision in his mouth. I'll speak. Asa went still. Mercy's hand tightened on air. The square hushed the way you hush a child you have grown to love. Wade looked at Asa. My brother died because he would have killed a woman and a child if he had not. I wanted to call that murder because it made me feel bigger. It was not. It was a choice made in a second that took a man a lifetime to live with. I have been trying to be the kind of man who would force him to make a worse choice next time. I am finished with that. He turned to Harlan. I'll testify to Voss's dealings. To Garen's. To the papers that were signed in rooms where the light never made it in. I will not have my name be part of a ledger that starves girls. Voss laughed, but not loudly. His laughter had shrunk. Confession, he said, is a sawhorse men stand on before they hang themselves. Then hang me, Wade said. But hang him next. Harlan looked ill. He looked at his deputies, who looked at Ephraim, who looked at the square, which looked back with the kind of eyes a man has to live in or leave. He drew himself up and attempted ceremony. Very well, he said briskly, which fooled no one. We'll convene a hearing at once. Mr. Dunn, restrain your men. Mr. Voss, you will be a crack. Not gun. Not wood. Something else. A sound from the edge of the square, where the telegraph office sat like a little chapel for wires. The crowd turned. The operator, young, hair like straw on a windy day, burst out holding a sheet of paper with both hands like a miracle that might fly away. Telegram, he cried. From Carson City. Harlan straightened as if someone had wound him up. Give it here, he snapped, and the boy faltered, then redirected and handed it to Mercy instead. Mercy read. Her eyes widened and then narrowed and then widened again. It's from Circuit Judge Langley, she said, voice carrying its own lantern. Says Harlan is removed pending investigation. Says any orders he has signed in the last 6 months are to be considered suspect until reviewed. Says a special marshal is on the road to, she looked up. To Junction Creek. The square breathed in, then out. Slowly. Men who had relied on Harlan's pen for their damage began to learn the particular cold of a wind that has shifted direction without asking them. Voss's smile did not die. It did a quieter thing. It went to sleep with one eye open. Special marshals, he said, lightly. They come and go. I remain. Maren stepped closer. Not today. He looked at her with something like respect, at last, and too late. You, he said, soft as a needle, are an inconvenient engine. My grandmother called that a heart, Maren said. Harlan tried to take the paper from Mercy. Mercy let him feel her grip and changed his mind for him. We'll hold them, Ephraim said, and deputies who wanted to be what their tins said they were nodded like their necks had been greased with better oil than yesterday's. The square shifted into the kind of work communities do when they are trying to remember they are not an accident. Ropes. Witnesses. Water. Bread. Asa stood very still. Maren went to him and stood in the same stillness, because sometimes you thank a person by not moving the air too much around them. He looked at her and the look contained too many things for one morning. You did not die, he said finally. Didn't care to, she said. Would have been inconvenient for lunch. He almost laughed. It made something in her start a list she'd like to finish, the first time Asa Merrick laughed when the day had no right to be funny, the first time Declan Voss realized paper was not a spell, the first time a girl named Junie slept under a roof that listened. Across the square, Wade raised his manacled hands. Merrick, he called. There's still one thing. Asa turned. The square turned with him because it had learned what happens when the right men face each other. I didn't come for Voss, Wade said. Not at first. I came for you. To make something symmetrical out of a grief that didn't balance. He swallowed and then took a breath that felt like he had been practicing it for years and only now got it right. I ask you to meet me outside the town at dusk, at the cottonwoods. I ask for a fight without men counting it. Not to kill you. To finish a thing between boys so the men they became can walk back to their lives and not break the furniture. No, Mercy said, flat. We are finished with men writing their endings on each other's bodies. Wade didn't take his eyes from Asa. I ask because I don't know how else to not be the worst parts of my name. The judge can have me after. He can have me now. But he swallowed again. I need that tree to hear me tell the wind I chose the right voice at least once. Silence. The thermals of a town's soul shifting. Asa's face did what the horizon does before a storm, it made promises and refused to say what kind. He looked at Maren. That was all. He put the question on her because men who are learning how to live ask the women who have been living all along which roads still hold. Maren felt the pull of every story, the one where men settle things with steel and the one where they settle them by admitting they were wrong and the one where the river washes it all away while everyone is busy choosing a sentence. Dusk, she said finally. At the cottonwoods. No guns. Wade laughed. It sounded like a sob trying to be handsome. No guns, he echoed. I'll bring the part of myself that can finally look at a man and not see a brother's shadow. Asa nodded, and the nod contained 5 years and a morning and the taste of smoke that wouldn't quite leave his mouth. Then, Voss purred, perhaps I'll sit in on the entertainment. He smiled at Harlan. Judge, you don't mind if the town holds court twice in one day? Mercy turned toward him slowly. Someone gag this man before he turns oxygen into smog. The crowd laughed in the way crowds do when they know the tide is turning and are choosing whether to be mocked by it or to surf. Ephraim gave orders that were really invitations. Ropes tightened. Bread sliced. The square became a machine that might produce a better noon. Maren stood very still again. Asa did too. The sun found its way into the space between them. The telegraph boy ran out again, hair worse, eyes wider, words tumbling. Another message, he squeaked. From the marshal. He says. What? Mercy demanded, impatient with drama that wasn't hers. He says he's an hour out, the boy gasped. And he says. The boy swallowed. The paper shook. He says his name is Asa Merrick. The square went very quiet. Asa Merrick, standing in the middle of it with rope burns on his hands and a mourning on his face, did not move. Marin's breath forgot to be breath and became a held him. "Read it," Ephraim said, very gently. The boy read. "Special Marshal Asa Merrick," he said, stumbling over the title like a boy tripping on a stair he hadn't known was there, "appointed by Circuit Judge Langley to investigate fraud and unlawful detentions in the southern counties. Arriving Junction Creek by noon." The boy looked up. "Signed Langley." Wade laughed, a better laugh this time, broken in the right places. Voss's smile died. Harlan looked at the ground and hunted for trapdoors. Asa rubbed at his jaw like a man reacquainting himself with a face he had left in a mirror. He exhaled. It sounded like winter leaving a room. Marin reached for him without moving her hands, and for the first time since the stove in the cabin and the lard in the river, she saw the next shape of the day clearly. Noon would arrive with a man who was already there. Dusk would come with a fight that could not be a fight. And someone, was watching them from the courthouse roofline, a figure stamped sharp against the new blue like a punctuation mark God had misplaced. The rifle barrel dipped. The trigger moved. The shot shattered Noon before it could arrive. And in the sliver of breath between sound and pain, Marin saw who she was. Not a cook, not a girl under anyone's paper, not even the woman Asa's quiet had let her be. She was a body that could move in the direction of danger and say a name. "Down." Her voice reached Mercy first. The skillet flashed up like a shield, Junie's small weight vanished behind Mercy's skirt. Ephraim pivoted, shoulders turning the square into a geometry he could control. Asa, already moving, knocked the telegraph boy to the boards with a shove that saved the boy's life and cost Asa a slice of his sleeve. The bullet snapped a piece of trim off the courthouse doorframe and turned it into confetti for a celebration no one had asked for. Splinters fanned across the steps like needles with no manners. Men ducked. Women pulled children down by muscle memory born of harder winters than this. Marin's ears rang. The garage band of panic tuned up in the town's chest. The shooter was a silhouette against the roofline, small as a sentence and twice as sharp, a hat brim, a length of rifle, the surety of a posture that had forgotten it could be anything else. "There!" Will croaked, pointing, hatless and newly brave for reasons he would not be able to explain later without talking about Mercy and the skillet and how a boy becomes more useful when women are watching. Asa didn't say anything grand. He just moved as if the air were an old friend he could still count on, hand signaling Ephraim left, Rojas right, a glance to Mercy that meant stay with the small ones, a look to Marin that meant I know you're going to and I won't waste time saying don't. The second shot came tight on the first, too close, too clean. It smashed the glass in the courthouse door with perfect disdain, and shards fell like stars losing their minds. Harlan yelped and ducked behind his seal like a child choosing the wrong parent to hide under. Stairs, Marin told her feet, and they obeyed. The courthouse steps bit her knees. Inside, the hall smelled like old paper and colder justice. Dust luminesced in the light the broken door let in, tiny galaxies confused about where to go and what to save. "Marin." Mercy's voice carried like a rope. "You take breath with you." "I'll borrow yours," Marin flung back, and hit the stairwell like a promise. The steps were steep and stingy. She took them two at a time and ran out of time. Third floor. A landing where an old school bell's rope hung like a vein through wood. Above, a hatch to the roof. The rope met her hand like a hand. She tugged once because the part of her that loved theater had a temper. The bell answered the town with a full-throated any day can be Sunday. The shooter's silhouette twitched. He hadn't accounted for a bell. Men who sell paper never do. Marin reached the hatch and shoved. It resisted like a man with a tidy desk. She shoved again. It let her in on a hinge that needed oil and forgiveness. Cold slapped her. The roof was a sheet of rough plank dusted with snow and command. Wind tried to convince her of low choices. She ignored it like she ignored every wrong man who had said please. The shooter stood 10 paces away on the shallow pitch, legs wide, feet telling the rifle where to aim as if the rifle were a student and he a bored teacher. He had a city coat, black, elegant, expensive in a way that made him colder. His hat-brimmed shadowed eyes that had learned to enjoy the shape of fear in other people's bodies. His muzzle swung toward the square again. Maren didn't think. She threw her weight in her voice. "Hey," she said, as if calling a dog away from a chicken yard, "you're about to make a mistake with the whole town watching." He swiveled, smooth as an expensive door. His face was lean, cut from ambition. His mouth did not like interruptions. "You," he said. "Down." "You first," she said, and took a step that was a dare. He didn't shoot. He had the distance that makes men believe they own time. "You the cook," he said, almost amused. "I was told you'd be inconvenient." "You were told right," she said. "Put the rifle down." "Or," he asked, the word a coin he thought would land on his side. "Or the bell keeps ringing until even the dead come see who you are." She put her hand back to the rope, fingers ready. "And Asa gets here, and you learn why small towns have long memories." "Ah," he said lightly, "the famous Merrick." He pronounced it as if it belonged in a story he would write after the day paid him. "I prefer introducing myself to men like him." "You," he flicked his muzzle to the side. "You're a piece on someone else's board." "Sir," Maren said, and the word came not from deference but from her ability to fit language into doors that didn't want to open, "I cook. I'm no one's piece. I keep men alive with beans and sugar and arithmetic. Now set the gun down and join the rest of us who intend to see tonight." He laughed once. Short. The kind of sound knives make when they kiss. "Name's Cade," he said. "Cade Morrow, if you plan to carve it into a gravestone because men like you insist on ritual." "Name noted," she said. "Would you like coffee after I explain why you're leaving?" His mouth made a twist men mistake for charm. "I like that you think life is a kitchen you control." Wind gusted. The bell rope swung against her wrist like an affectionate snake. She felt the square under her, all those lives in their little arrangements, Ephraim's boots, Mercy's skillet, Junie's eyes harder than years, Wade's rope, Vasa's smile, Ace's breath measuring the angle between choice and consequence. "Last ask," she said. "Put it down. Or I make noise you can't outshoot." He angled the rifle back to the square. She yanked the bell rope hard enough to wake Saints. The peel slammed into the roof. Cade flinched, not in fear, but in irritation, and the barrel dipped a hair. A hair was enough to change a headline. Footfalls behind her. Maren did not turn. She felt him arrive like weather. "Asa." "Step away from her," he said, and his voice could have convinced a river to choose one bank over the other. Cade glanced back, took in the man behind him, recalculated a day he had been too sure about. "Special Marshal," he said dry as winter. "You came early." "To my own appointment," Asa said. "Lay it down." Cade smiled small. "You could shoot me where I stand." "I could," Asa said. "But the only thing I'm interested in shooting today is the habit of men who think a gun is the only sentence they can finish." Cade's eyes cut to Maren and back. "Your woman's brave," he said, like a man checking the fit of a coat he might steal later. "She's not my anything," Asa said. "She's herself, and that's a bigger problem for you than I'll ever be." Down in the square a boy cried. The sound climbed the courthouse like ivy. Asa's hand did not tremble. Cade's did. Just the thought of a tremble. Maren took that tremble and made it her work. "We changed the river," she said. "We can change you." She took one step closer because fear had already done its worst for the day and she had no time left for keeping it comfortable. "Put it down. Go home. Learn to be a different kind of man." "Home," he said, as if testing a foreign noun. "You think men like me have doors that open to that word?" She had no answer he would believe. "Then lay it down for our sake. For the boy who cried. For the woman with the skillet who has better work than burying bodies that think they're important." He made a face as if mercy had a smell. "This is tedious," he said, and swung the muzzle toward Asa because when you fail to scare a woman, you turn to the man out of habit. Asa moved. Not much. Enough. He knocked the barrel with the heel of his hand and all the air in the day went into the breath between intention and regret. The rifle fired, the sky shrugged. The shot went wild into clouds that had opinions about this conversation. Cade swung back, fast, knife out as if he had always meant to introduce it. Merrin chose then. She went low. She hit his legs because legs are arrogant and forget to look for hands. He stumbled. Asa stepped in, took the knife wrist, bent it into an angle men only find in prayer, and the knife became a useless idea scudding across the roof. Cade fought, but it was a fight without a vocabulary. Asa took him down fast, and careful, and tied him with a length of curtain cord because maybe law looks like that sometimes, making do with what holds. Done, Asa said, breathing a little, eyes cold and kind at once. Merrin? She held up her hands. No blood. Just adrenaline, the old friend that leaves without paying for its drink. Present, she said, and her voice surprised her by not shaking. Below, the square had begun to exhale. Men were pointing, which is sometimes how the body claps in situations it doesn't have a song for. Mercy's skillet hung at a less aggressive angle. Junie watched the roof with unblinking attention like it was a stove that could still burn her if she looked away. They brought Cade down the stairs with a degree of gentleness Merrin did not know she'd vote for and found herself insisting on anyway. In the square, the deputies, Harlan's men, but blinking in the new light as if replacing lenses, took him with odd hands. Asa Merrick, someone called from the road, the voice of brass instrument. You going to make us introduce you to yourself? A file of riders cantered into the square. 2 war stars 1 degree less temporary than the one Asa had declined to put on that morning. The lead was a woman in a dust-coated duster, hat brim low, posture like a math problem with a satisfying answer. She swung down with efficiency and a smile tucked into her cheek for later. Deputy United States Marshal Tamsin Birch, she said, sweeping the square with a look that collected facts and owed none of them a drink. Paperwork says I'm escort and witness to an appointment. City says the telegraph boy likes to shout. Which do we do first? Asa wiped his palms on his coat as if he could remove rope burn in a past. The appointment, he said quietly. Birch reached into her coat and pulled out a badge wrapped in court paper. She read the paper aloud so the town could hear itself become legal and so Harlan could hear his authority become heir. By order of Circuit Judge Langley, and with concurrence of the U.S. Marshal for the district, Asa Merrick is hereby appointed Special Marshal pro tempore for the purpose of investigating fraud, false detention, coercion by forged instrument, and related offenses in the counties designated south and east of the Carson Rail. Authority includes temporary deputization, assembly of a citizen jury, and the power to arrest where cause is found. Effective upon presentation. She turned the paper so the sun could see the signatures. Signatures are untidy, she added, but the law can read bad handwriting when it wants to. She pinned the badge to Asa's coat as if sewing a button on a shirt for a man who had finally decided to attend his own life. The metal touched cloth. The square was very quiet, like men and women remembering that authority is supposed to be something you give someone and can take back if it forgets how to behave. Asa cleared his throat. He looked at Merrin for a second too long in a way that only she understood. Then he spoke to the square. I'll use this, he said, lifting a hand to the badge without touching it, the way Mercy uses a skillet. To serve. To protect heat and time. To keep harm from pretending to be a meal. Mercy's eyes shone like a stove door giving back firelight. Birch turned to Harlan. Judge, she said pleasantly, you're relieved. If you object into my notebook and we'll file it under exercise. Harlan sputtered. This is irregular. Correct, Birch said. Irregular is the only thing that gets fixed around here. Voss had been quiet, which meant he had been taking notes. He smiled now in a way that let Merrin see all the metal under his gums. Badge or no, he said, voice comfortable as a checkbook, you'll need a court to make this more than pageantry. Lucky for you, Mercy said, we brought one. She lifted the ledger. And we brought witnesses. And we brought a town that remembers who fed it when babies were sick and who stole from its amens with paper. Jury, Asa said simply, turning to Ephraim. 12. Not men I pick. Men and women the town names. We'll hold it right here where the sky can hear. Names came. They came from corners of life Voss had never bought, the schoolteacher with a scar on her lip and a laugh she'd rescued from sorrow, the tinker who fixed the wheel on a Sunday because a woman needed to bury her mother without walking, the old Mexican couple whose orchard had fed more mouths than Voss's money ever would, Mercy, because law without bread is just a threat. Harlan tried to object to Mercy sitting. Tamsin Birch looked at him until he remembered a better use for his eyes. They arranged benches and boxes, made a table out of truth and rough boards, and called it good enough because good enough with a spine beats perfect without one. Birch swore them in with words like rope and kept her hat on because ceremony is not a hat rack. Voss, Asa said, facing the man like a man faces a mirror he intends to take down and replace with a window, you'll have your say. Then the folks you tried to put under your paper will have theirs. Voss shrugged with elegant disrespect. I purchased contracts, he said. Judge Harlan signed. Men and women commit themselves every day to terms they later dislike. The difference between me and a saint is that I don't pretend to be surprised when the world asks you to pay what you owe. What you purchased were men, Marin said, the words low but clear. Women. Children. You bought the authority to pretend they were less. That isn't a contract. That's vanity written in cursive. He smiled at her like she was a fiction he intended to misquote. You're spirited, he said. Has anyone told you men find that fetching? Men who need to be fetched are not my problem, she said. Your dealings are. She lifted the ledger. Here. Mercy's book. Names and rations and hours and wages. How you shaved each when you could and punished voices that asked why. How Garran went with your paper to fetch bodies the way a butcher fetches meat. Objection, Harlan said, out of habit. Birch wrote the word down and then drew a little box next to it to keep it safe while it died. Liam Pike stepped forward and took off his hat. His hair lay flat, shame's comb. I rode for Voss, he said. I watched men put powder where water lives. I brought word because I remembered my grandmother's hand on my head the day she taught me the word no. It has uses besides telling a girl she can't cross a room without permission. Wade raised his cuffed hands next. He looked thinner without anger. I came here to make Merrick hurt like I hurt, he said. I'm ready to make a different trade. I'll give you the names that hired me to shoot where a town was eating breakfast. They're Voss's names, but he pretends he doesn't know them. He does. Voss smirked. Honor among thieves, he said. Charming. Honor among cooks, Mercy countered. Useful. Junie stepped up then, small shoulders squared the way people square them when they've learned the world is a bully and realized bullies can't stand it when you look at their shoes. She pointed at Garran, tied my wrists so I couldn't get away. He said a man had paid to put me on a wagon till spring. He said women are too expensive to feed unless they make money. He said, she stopped. She didn't cry. She made a face and kept the rest because children are better accountants than men who carry little books and lie to them. Garran tried to smile again. It failed to land. Child, he said, you are confused. She is not confused, Marin said. She is recovered. Asa listened, not as a man gathers ammunition, but as a man gathers debts he means to pay in full. When the speaking ended, he didn't rise and point, didn't turn the day into a theater where his name could be shouted back at the actors. Jury, he said simply. Decide. 12 heads bent. Words moved between them like the soft noise a sewing circle makes when remaking a torn coat on a winter night. Marin watched Mercy's lips, counting, correcting, reminding. It did not take long because truth rarely requires delay beyond the time it takes fear to stop thrashing. The schoolteacher stood. On the charges, she said, voice steady as a ruler, we find Declan Voss guilty of unlawful detention by forged instrument, conspiracy to commit arson, attempted murder by design, and the crime of being a man too sure of himself to notice he'd stopped being a neighbor. We recommend immediate transport to the circuit judge and confinement until trial. We find Wade Hawkins guilty of assault with a firearm, but we also find that he saved lives by testimony today. We recommend mercy under supervision. We find Garran Pike guilty of kidnapping and collusion. We recommend he be placed where paper cannot find him. Birch nodded, satisfaction doing quiet arithmetic in her eyes. So ordered, she said, and men who had set their badges down mentally for years picked them up with their bodies and walked Voss and Garran toward a future with smaller horizons. Wade turned his face to sky and let a single tear freeze where the wind could announce it. Harlan tried to slip away like a thought you don't want to finish. Birch caught him by the sleeve without looking and penned him with 3 words, "Stay for instructions." The square exhaled again. Laughter showed up in corners as if it had been late to the meeting. Mercy put bread into hands like altar wafers, and the town remembered what it feels like to stand when justice sits down in the right place. Marin went to Asa because that was the shape the day made. He stood like he always did, upright without pretending unbreakability. The badge on his coat looked both at home and like a decision he would have to keep making. "It fits," she said. "It pinches," he said. "That's how I know it's mine." She would have answered with something reckless and necessary, but a ripple moved across the crowd, the kind that means a rumor has found legs. At the edge of the square, a boy in a cap tugged his mother's sleeve. She pointed, then clapped a hand over her mouth. Heads turned. Eyes climbed. On the courthouse roofline where Kate had been, another figure stood for a heartbeat, then vanished. Marin felt the old chill, the one that says a day has reminded itself that it has more than one story to tell. "Dusk," Wade said, pulling her attention back with the rope of his voice. "The Cottonwoods. We keep our word." Asa nodded. "Dusk," he said. "No guns." Birch heard it. She shaped her mouth around the idea and spit it out reluctantly. "I don't like it," she said. "But I trust you to make the shape right." "You'll have men around the rise," Asa said. "If it turns ugly." "It won't." Birch snorted. "Dying words, Merrick." She clapped him on the shoulder once and turned to escort Voss, who had learned how to look bored while waiting to see if the world still belonged to him. Afternoon wore its hours like a coat that didn't mind dirt. The town untensed. Someone tuned a fiddle out of habit. The telegraph boy sent the news and then ran home to let his mother know his skin was still his. Marin sat with Mercy on the cook wagon step and peeled potatoes because the body needs small cycles when the world has slung it through big ones. "You shouldn't go," Mercy said without heat. "I should," Marin said without apology. "Because men have to hit each other to hear themselves think?" Mercy's eyebrow did the work of 2. "Because a boy made a promise to a ghost," Marin said. "And a man needs permission to break it." Mercy grunted, satisfied and irritated. "Fine. But you carry a rope." "I always carry a rope," Marin said, and Mercy laughed because one of the graces the day had given them was the right to laugh without looking over a shoulder. They walked to the Cottonwoods at dusk because horses have a way of making entrances into theater, and this needed to be quiet. The river remembered them, said a low hello. The trees held cold in their bark but gave the air a mercy that felt like privacy. Wade waited, unshackled by Birch for this hour and watched by men who understood what condition their mercy came in. He had shed the swagger that made him look bigger and found in the shedding that he fit better in his life. "No guns," he said, spreading empty palms. "No knives." "As promised," Asa said, stepping into the small clearing that had once held children's forts and weddings and a burial for a dog that had died right and deserved a song. Marin stood at the edge of the trees and made herself calm, wrist against bark, breath in ribs, attention on the way Asa set his feet. She could read him now, the little shift that meant balance, the slack in the shoulders that meant nothing to prove and everything to guard. She had never wanted to rewrite a man's story as badly as she wanted to rewrite this one, and she wouldn't. She would watch and let the present be stubborn enough to teach the past something. Wade started first. He came in with the desperate energy of a man who knew the shape of a fight and was trying to force the fight to be that shape. Asa took it, moved with it, let it spend itself, turned wrists, redirected breath, put weight on his back with the kind of tenderness you save for breaking a fever. Again, Wade panted. As many times as you need, Asa said. Again. And again. And the thing became not a fight but a dialogue, Wade's angry grammar meeting Asa's patient syntax. They grappled and rolled and stood and fell, and the river offered rhythm like a drum. Wade swung a fist, Asa caught it, held it, looked at the knuckles that had made choices and said, "No," without speaking. Finally Wade went to his knees and stayed there. He put his hands on the ground the way a man does when he's meeting it for the first time as an equal. He sobbed once, a sound the cottonwoods absorbed and did not mock. "I wanted you dead," he said, looking up at Asa with a face that had remembered how to be a boy in a way that did not embarrass the man. "I thought that would balance a ledger the world had kept wrong on me. I thought," he shook his head. "All I think now is that I need to stop thinking like a Hawkins and start thinking like somebody whose name didn't get written down in a sheriff's notebook before he was born." Asa stepped forward. He did not offer his hand because sometimes a man needs to stand up on his own to take possession of the standing. But when Wade found his feet, Asa put a hand on his shoulder, and the whole day made a new shape. "Write your brother's name in the right book," Asa said. "By living right. Not by killing better than he did." Wade nodded once, a gratitude that would take years to say fully. He turned to Birch's men and lifted his hands. "I'll walk," he said. "I won't run." They took him without force. Mercy exhaled from where she had hidden in the shadows because she is not stupid and had not stayed away. Marin turned from the trees and realized she was crying, not because she was sad, but because some nights score the heart like a phonograph and the music needs somewhere to go. Asa found her. "You all right?" he asked. "You ask that too much," she said, "and never enough." They walked back toward town with the river at their shoulder, as if it were a friend they could bring along and lean against if the street got rowdy. The sky had turned that particular blue you can only find by being outside exactly when the sun shrugs on its way to the other side of a hill. Stars auditioned. The first ones won their parts by being brave. In the square, lanterns hung like constellations waiting for stories. Birch had Voss secured and Harlan sitting on a bench with his wrists politely together because even a removed judge looks like furniture until you teach him better. Garran pouted in a way that made you want to assign him chores until his soul remembered it had elbows. Town had gathered around a long table lashed together out of planks and hope. Mercy stood behind it, ladling stew into bowls that steamed their thanks. Ephraim walked the perimeter like a shepherd who had decided to love his sheep enough to cuss when they needed it. Junie sat on the wagon step, boots swinging, a blanket around her shoulders that had belonged to Mercy's dead man and therefore carried more stories than it did wool. Conversations braided, unbraided, found rhythm. The fiddle that had announced itself earlier made good on a threat to play. The player chose songs that remembered steps the feet could still manage. Birch loosened her coat and looked almost human. Marin and Asa took bowls and sat on a crate at the edge of it all, where you can see a thing and not feel obliged to own it. Their elbows touched. It felt like putting your hand in a pocket that has held your hand before. "You could have killed him," she said, not needing to specify which him because the day had been full of men who needed the word to put them under a manageable roof. "I could have," he said. "I'll spend the rest of my life choosing fewer days when I can say that about myself." "You're a marshal now." She tasted the word. It didn't taste like a badge. It tasted like responsibility in a language she was fluent in. "Temporary," he said. "Long enough to put a pin in the kind of men who use ink badly." "You're stuck with it," she said. "Even if you take the badge off later, the town will remember that you wore it in a way that made the air easier to breathe." He glanced at her. "You plan to keep reminding me?" She shrugged. "If you take up bragging, I'll hit you with a spoon." He actually laughed then, low and surprised at himself, and Marin put the sound in a pocket of her mind she kept for difficult days. Junie slid off the wagon and came to stand before them like a commissioner of something important. "Do you have a bed?" she asked Marin. Not shy. Not begging. Just inventory. "Yes," Marin said. It's made of a mattress and a blanket, and Mercy cussing anyone who tries to steal it. Can I slip under your blanket? Junie asked, dead serious and deadly tired. The words hit Marin with a redirection of an old story that had begun on a night cold enough to make a girl ask a question without trimming it. She laughed, and then her laugh turned into the kind of tenderness that sets bones instead of just noticing the break. You can, Marin said. But only because you asked, and because I'll snore in your ear if you take too much. Junie nodded, satisfied. I don't mind snoring. It's like cows talking about their day. She turned and marched back to Mercy, who tied her hair with a strip of cloth and installed her next to the stove like a saint near a reliquary. Birch joined them then, bowl in hand, badge glinting like a star that had come down to correct a map. Langley will be here tomorrow, she said. With more paper. Good paper. Harlan's face is going to learn a new school of adjectives. You'll ride with Voss? Asa asked. I'll ride ahead, Birch said. Men like him prefer to be escorted by fear. I prefer they be escorted by boredom and a meal schedule they didn't choose. She scooped stew with a precise bite. You too, she added without looking, are trouble in a packaging the frontier enjoys. Meaning? Marin said. Meaning, don't leave, Birch said. We need you. Junie needs you. Mercy pretends otherwise, but she needs you both because she is tired and she doesn't admit it to anyone who hasn't earned a skillet scar. Mercy, overhearing, made a face at Birch that would have gotten a lesser man put in stocks, then smiled because Tamsin Birch carried truth like a badge you could eat off of. As the night settled, the town settled with it, into a shape that could hold until morning. Marin walked Junie to Mercy's wagon and tucked her in. She stood for a long second, watching the girl's chest rise and fall, counting as if numbers could bridle fear. Mercy put a hand on Marin's shoulder. You're allowed to sleep now, Mercy said. I'm allowed, Marin agreed. I don't know if I'll take permission. Take it, Mercy said. Tomorrow we'll need you. Trouble doesn't clock out on time. It leaves you notes. Marin found the bunk in the women's wagon, lay down fully dressed because clothes are armor against the sort of dreams a day like this likes to send, and closed her eyes. Sleep came like a friend who brings a plate and says, eat first, talk later. She woke in the thin gray of not quite dawn. The square was a collection of quiet shapes, men curled under blankets, fire coals humming the low song of endurance, the courthouse black against a sky negotiating with itself. She slipped out, boots on, coat around, and went to the river. It liked to see her, or she imagined it did. Either way, it did what she craved most in everything lately, it did not lie. Asa was already there because of course he was. He stood with his hands in his pockets and his hat low and his shoulders calculating a way to carry one more day. Couldn't sleep, she asked. I slept, he said. My body did. My mind is still doing inventory. Of what's left or what we gained? Both. He glanced sideways at her. Do you plan to keep cooking for Junction Creek? If they'll keep eating, she said. And if they'll let me keep books that insist on fairness. They will, he said. Ephraim would sooner forget his own name than forget his ledger. She swallowed and let her eyes follow the river's shoulder under the skin of ice. And you? I'll wear this, he said, touching the badge, until the town can stand up without it. Then I'll put it somewhere it can remind me without directing me. That's almost a speech, she said. I had practice last night, he said. Talking a boy into being a man. The sun negotiated a little more light. The telegraph boy yawned his way across the square. Birch's riders shouldered saddles and sent up prayers disguised as cussing. Mercy banged a pot with the affection of someone who has run out of words for love and found that noise will do. They walked back together and didn't make the mistake of discussing whether their walking was metaphor. The morning had business. Voss got tied to a mule with less dignity than usual. Garan whined until Mercy moved the skillet, and then he learned to stop. Harlan produced a speech no one asked for and Birch interrupted it with a yawn so perfect the town clapped. Wade shook Asa's hand, then Marin's, and then Mercy's, and then asked if he could write a letter. Mercy handed him a pencil as if she had invented them for this purpose. "Goodbye," Birch said at last, reins in hand, Voss's future attached to the other end like a reluctant parcel. "Try not to set anything important on fire while I'm gone." "That's your job," Mercy said. "We do arson with better seasoning." The escort rattled out. The town waved the way people wave when a chapter has the decency to end on the right page. Marin turned to find Ephraim across from her with a serious expression and a fresh already open ledger. "You're hired permanent," he said. "Salary fair. Room, board, and Mercy's unasked for advice included. You'll run the kitchen and the books. You'll have men who make sense for once. You'll have women who make the men keep making it." Marin stuck out her hand. He took it. Mercy hooped because men rarely concluded business in a way that didn't make a mess, and this had been tidy and good. Asa stood as if the badge weighed more now that it had a bed to hang over. "I'll ride the Southern line," he said. "There's a family out there who thinks Harlan's pen can lock a girl in a room at will. I intend to explain to their door otherwise." Marin looked at him, and the look was a thread that needed to cross several miles and return with a different color. "You'll come back," she said. "I will," he said simply. She nodded. "Bring appetite. I plan to make a stew that will re-educate your marrow." He tipped his hat, which meant more now that she knew who he had been and who he was trying to be. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and it wasn't a joke and wasn't quite reverence. It was the space between them learning it could be a place to sit down without anyone owning the chair. He rode. She watched. The town resumed being a town in all the ways that hide the heroics: mending fence, washing shirts, checking the sourdough starter, counting nails, repairing a child's toy without being asked. Marin moved among it like air warmed by bread. Nominal noon found her lifting the lid on a pot and being satisfied with the steam's answer. Junie fetched water and returned it the way a child returns to a home that has remembered how to hang up its welcome. Will told a story about his hat that got taller each telling. Rojas cleaned his rifle without love because he didn't want to need it and cleaned it anyway. The telegraph ticked. The world accomplished the trick of being both larger and exactly the size of a square with a stove. It should have ended there, day done, prayer over, amen, and in some ways it did. But Marin had learned that endings in the West were just days exhaling. Toward evening, she stood by the stove door, rubbing warmth into her hands to trick them into believing they could always be warm. Mercy leaned beside her, close enough to share bone heat the way women do when neither wants to admit the day has asked for too much. "You ever think about that first night?" Mercy asked. "Yes," Marin said, and the word contained a cabin, a blanket, a man too careful to be anything but decent. "Every time I fold a blanket, I think about it." "Good," Mercy said. "Let it remind you what a right man looks like in the dark." "Like a stove," Marin said. "Containing the same fire he had in the daylight." Mercy bumped her shoulder, which is a hug used when there isn't time for a better one. "You'll do," she said. Asa came back 2 days later, as it turned out, and because stories want you to see the shape you've earned, he chose an hour when the light made the world soft on edges and hard on intention. He swung down and walked toward the cook fire without making noise, but everything that cared about him learned the sound and turned to look. He sat. She handed him a bowl. He took one bite and then another and then closed his eyes like prayer considers a congregation. "You re-educated my marrow," he said. "Good," she said. It was leaning. He pushed the bowl back halfway, then pulled it toward him again because men who survived a certain kind of life don't let food sit too far away once they've found it. "Birch sent word," he said. "Voss is in a cell that does not forgive. Harlan will be learning the difference between robes and laundry. Liam's taken a job 2 counties over that will let him sleep without making lists of who he hurt. Wade," he paused. "Wade asked me to visit when the judge is done with him. I plan to go." "Good," she said again, because sometimes the right word can carry 2 meanings across a table without dropping either. He looked at her hands. She let him. "You saved us," he said. "The river." The fuse. The rope. The part where you jumped on Voss like a woman who didn't read the chapter about waiting. I read it, she said. It was badly written. He laughed that little laugh again, and the day got 15% easier. They ate in the noise of a town doing small things right. Then, as if the story had waited for them to be fed before delivering one last brief, the telegraph boy ran in, breathless and certain he was about to say something that would make men use their legs. Message from Langley, he gasped. Says the circuit is sending resources to fix the dam proper. Says they're sending a surveyor who knows how to listen to water. Says, he peered at the paper. Says he wants to meet the cook who saved a town with lard. Mercy howled and held out her hands for a high five that would have broken bone in a clumsier partnership. Maren slapped them and nearly lost her footing off the wagon step. Laughter made her ears warm. Junie beamed like a coal catching. Tell Langley, Mercy said to the boy, we will bake him a pie that will impeach his diet. Tell him, Maren added, to stop calling it resources and start calling it people who can read a river without making it stand up straight out of respect. The boy nodded as if those were words he knew how to relay. He loped back to his wire to turn a woman's sentences into little clicks that would need translating by somebody who had never met a skillet and would never be right until he did. Night came on honestly. Stars approved by appearing. Birch wasn't there to remind them to behave. They behaved anyway. The river, gladdened by its ongoing job, made a sound like a spine relieved of a burden. Asa stood to go because both of them liked the idea of arrivals more than they liked the idea of partings but understood that departures are where you see if a person intended to return. You'll be here in the morning, Maren said, not a question. I will, he said. He hesitated. Men like him often hesitate when the words they owe cost more than the ones they've spent their whole lives practicing. About that night, he said. The cabin. What you asked. She held up a hand. It was a good question, she said. The answer saved me. It saved more than me. He nodded slowly. It saved me, too, he said. Just took a few days to notice. They looked at each other a beat too long, just long enough to teach the night their faces. Then he went to do a circuit of the square because a man with a badge should always know the shape of the place he claims to guard, and she went back to the fire to scrub a pot because a woman who keeps a town fed knows the shape of the work that keeps the badge honest. At the edge of it, Junie snored like a cow telling a story. Mercy tucked the blanket up to her chin and then added another because love is weight when it's done right. In the town of Junction Creek, pointing its noses toward morning with stubborn polite pride, went to sleep almost believing that paper could be just one kind of truth again, and that the other kind was the kind they made together, ledger lines that included mercy, signatures that looked like hands doing what hands should. Somewhere beyond the cottonwoods, a coyote yipped the way a trick must, and the horses answered by shifting their weight in a language that said we are here, we are alive, we will stand if you stand. Maren lay down knowing the same. She had a stove, a ledger, a friend who laughed in the difficult spaces, a girl who asked permission as if God were listening, and a man who wore a star like it had woken him up rather than like it had let him go to sleep. Tomorrow, there would be flour to measure and men to remind that appetites are not law and women to listen to when the world got clever again. Tomorrow, there would be a judge to feed and a dam to argue with and a sheriff's office that would need chairs moved so it could learn to seat the right people. Tonight, there would be rest. And beyond the square, where the road bent into possibility, the wind made a small sound like the first page of a new book being turned by a person who had learned how to read herself. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.